Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are doing a retrospective episode on one of the best games of the decade, if not of all time, The Last of Us.
Yes, the best game of the year 2013.
Yes. A year that had a bunch of great games. One of the... it's the second year of this podcast, was 2013. We did a full review of The Last of Us when it came out on episode 54 of this show. And now, 200 episodes later, we are revisiting it. It is the game's 5-year anniversary this year. It had a big showing at E3 2018.
Well, the sequel did.
The sequel did, sorry, yeah. The sequel had a big showing at E3 2018. That made both you and me independently go play it again.
Yeah.
And we want to talk about it because it's super interesting to revisit a game like this that is technically from a previous hardware generation, but I think, Sean, you would agree with me, feels very much in the spirit of the moment in gaming we are in.
Absolutely, yeah. It is one of those games that comes in right at the end of a console generation that is one of, if not like the most influential game then for the console generation that is coming in.
Yes.
Because obviously all the games being made right around 2013 would have all been deeply influenced by The Last of Us.
Absolutely. And to talk with us about the game, because Sean and I know this game very well. This was both our third times through the game.
Yes, because we played it when it came out, then we played it a year later when the remastered version came out on PS4, which this is the version that both of us played this time.
I did not break out my PS3 and go downgrade myself.
He's like, remember when you had to shoot with L1 and R1 because the triggers on the PS3 sucked?
And we do have a special guest here today who had never played the game before, but also just played it for the first time, Mr. Thomas Lack.
Hello.
He's here again. It's Thomas.
I am once again making my somewhat more frequent than usual appearance on the podcast.
It's disturbing. It's too many.
It's probably going to be the last time for a while. Don't worry.
That was ominous.
That was ominous. This is
very ominous.
This podcast will be called The Last of Thomas.
Yes.
Because in the middle, a clicker is going to eat you alive.
I will use my shiv.
Okay.
To defend myself.
You shouldn't upgrade and get the Shiv Master thing because it's just a waste of good shit. Honestly.
I didn't actually.
Yeah, that's smart.
In real life, you never know.
And we're going to try, on this podcast to talk about, what makes the game amazing, enduring, all these things, but also try to answer the question, why didn't Joel ever just get a knife to replace his army of shivs?
I asked myself that for 15 hours straight.
Especially, I didn't find myself asking until you get Ellie to play as, and you're like, she's got the right idea. Yeah. That knife is useful.
Yeah.
All right. But yes, we will be talking about all that. Nothing else on the show this week. This is airing sort of during our behind-the-scenes hiatus. We're not stopping episodes, but by the time you hear this, will not be in Colorado anymore, probably, because I am moving to Iowa to do my PhD, and we're going to be on a little bit of a break while I do that, because... obviously. Because I'm not going to be, binging a new game or something, or taking notes on a movie or something.
Yeah, look forward to us Skyping a podcast while you're driving to Iowa.
Yes. We could do it.
The audio quality will be very intermittent.
Maybe we'll do a segment.
Yeah.
We'll see. But anyway, so if, crazy things have happened in the world since then that would affect The Last of Us, we're not talking about that. If Cordyceps has actually mutated to a human virus... which is totally possible in the world we're in.
Yeah, it wouldn't be probably in the top 10 worst things happening in the month of August. I'm going to predict that. If the zombie apocalypse occurs, we'll be like, this is kind of a refreshing change. This is nice.
Yes. All right. But anyway, let's just get to the main event. Let's talk about The Last of Us.
All right.
Thomas, I kind of want to start with you.
Okay.
I mean, you guys know what Sean and I think of The Last of Us. We like it.
Yes.
We like it a lot. You had never played it. You have not. You just got your PS4.
Yeah, that's actually why I played it for the first time now. I just got a PS4 Pro a couple months ago. So I played the game in glorious 1800p.
Oh, wow.
But, I mean, I hadn't played it for 5 years, not because I wasn't interested in it, but because I didn't have a PlayStation ever.
Yes, the last PlayStation is PlayStation and Nintendo are the two brands left that have true exclusives.
Yes,
that you cannot play in other places.
Yeah.
So so you played this for the first time. You had never played a Naughty Dog game.
That is correct. I've now played 5.
He's gone back and played all the Uncharted's.
Yeah,
not all of them. How many Uncharted's have you played now?
Just 3.
Just 3.
Yeah,
okay.
So only 4.
Yeah, if you want the Vita game, I can hook you up.
That would be the third game I've ever played on Vita.
I never fucking played it. I played the first level of it.
I played the first level of it too.
It's not good.
Not to talk too much about Uncharted, but I will say I like The Last of Us a whole lot more than those first 3 Uncharted games.
Yeah, it's my favorite. I've liked the Uncharted games more on my second playthrough, but definitely when I played through those games and then played The Last of Us, I like The Last of Us a lot more than them.
Yeah, it feels... Last of Us was 2013?
Yes. So it was after Uncharted 3 by 2 years.
4 years, actually. Or just 2 years. But it feels like it's a lot newer than just 2 years after that game, was my impression of it. As, I do play a lot of games that are about 5 years old, but this game didn't feel 5 years old to me. It felt maybe 2 years old.
Yeah, part of that is also because Naughty Dog handled the remaster in-house, so that remaster is really, really well done.
It is, it does look, unmistakably like a PS4 mid to late gen game so far. So.
Yeah, it's one of the only ones that old that got a full PS4 Pro patch also.
Yeah.
For 4K support.
Yeah, 1800p, not 4K. Doesn't matter.
It's upscale. It's checkerboarding. It's a check-out Digital Foundry. It's a thing.
Yes.
Yeah. But the other thing going along with sort of how it looks, it actually controls really, really well for what it is, I think. There's a lot of stealth games. I like stealth games a lot, and I wouldn't say The Last of Us is primarily a stealth game, but it has really good stealth mechanics that I found really compelling and really interesting to play through. So that was one of the things I liked most about it.
Here's my question for you, Thomas. Do you like The Last of Us?
I love The Last of Us. It's a really, really good game.
You were not super into it right at the start, I could tell.
It's a little slow to get going.
Yeah.
It is.
It's super slow, and I like that about it.
I say to start, the very beginning of the game is fucking incredible.
Right. The first 30 minutes
the first 20 minutes will keep you going for hours, but after that it is just a little slow, I think. Basically, once you actually get going after Tess is out of the picture, I think it starts to pick up a lot. That's sort of after it's done tutorializing everything too. It does overall, that opening section, it is a little slower, but it does balance the tutorializing with the story pretty well.
I remember when we played the remastered version, Sean, in 2014, and I played it again, and I was struck my second time by the slowness of the opening, which I don't think I'd noticed the first time I'd played it, where I'm like, I would talk to you, because we lived together at the time in Boulder, and I would be like, Sean, when does summer end? Because I remembered winter being as long as everything else because it's so impactful. Winter you can play in one sitting. It's a very short part of the game. In fact, all of the last 3 seasons together are not probably as long as summer. And I've thought about that over the years since, whether or not that's a good pace. And playing it again really solidified for me, I think it's a brilliant pace. And I said this to you when you were approaching the end of the summer section, and you were kind of still asking but when does the story kick in or whatever? Because at that point you're kind of on a road to nowhere. You're not sure where you're going other than, I guess, to Tommy's, but what do we do when we get there? We don't know, right?
Yeah. You spend so long in summer at that checkpoint, or the former military checkpoint, just trying to escape those people.
Yeah,
that's
in Pittsburgh.
What you spend the longest doing.
Yeah, that's a really long part, yeah. And I was thinking about this, and what I came to when I was playing it again, knowing where it was all going, was that is all set up in some sense. It is all laying the groundwork, it is laying foundation, it is getting you into the world, into the mechanics of the game itself, but also what those are meant to instill in you about how these characters feel about the world in which they live. And most importantly, it's creating the relationship between Joel and Ellie. And as soon as that seasonal thing clicks over to fall, I think the game is constant, just mainline payoff into your veins from the moment you cut to fall to the end of the game of, Joel meeting his brother again, and Joel and Ellie kind of solidifying their relationship, to the horrors of the winter section, to what happens in the spring at the hospital. Spoilers for this game if you haven't played it, by the way.
No, this is a full spoiler discussion. This is not what happens at the end of The Last of Us? Oh,
and
talk around it.
And we talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago on the podcast when Sean and I talked about how we were playing it again. I think what that is it's a very novelistic approach to storytelling that you almost never see in video games.
Yeah.
Which is the first half of the book is not the page-turning half of the book. It's the, let's get into this world and let's get into the prose stylings of this world, which for The Last of Us is, the specific pace of combat encounters and the space between them and the way dialogue works and the way a lot of the game is just walking around and looking at things and talking to the people around you and that sort of thing. And then you find yourself at some point in that book oh, now I can't put it down. and you're going to read that last half much faster than you read the first half, which is true of a lot of great books. Not all of them, but many of them.
Like another game, a recent game that has a similar structure in my mind, that in different ways but has a similar effect for me, is Nier Automata, of having that, like, you need to, while it's not like the meatiest part of the game, and it's not the part of the game that when you sit down and have like a big discussion about the story like we're doing, you don't necessarily dig into the summer thing super deep, but you need all that time to like understand the characters, to see the characters grow a little bit together and kind of bounce off of each other, because if you don't have all that time just spent with them in this world, then when the events start picking up and like the twists start happening, you don't believe them, right?
Yes.
Like you need to be able to like sit and have this really solid foundation and understanding of what these characters are, what their motivations are, where their place is, and that takes like time, both in terms of like character time in the world spent together, but then time for you as a person sitting in that story. And so it's not the most glamorous thing, but I think it's, if you're telling like a pretty big story the way that The Last of Us is, it's the right choice you need. It's like it's something that a lot of storytellers would maybe have the instinct to cut that stuff out because it's like, oh, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. But then when you start getting the, like the winter section would be nowhere near as impactful if you hadn't seen everything that Joel and Ellie had been through together before that point.
Because I think The Last of Us leverages minutia in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
And it's hard to think of like, oh, this is a post-apocalyptic setting. It's all fantastical and it's all very different than our reality. What do you mean by minutia? Well, what I mean is that from the beginning of the game to the end of summer, which is at least half of the game, depending on how you're playing it, and probably sometimes more, depending on if it's like your first time and you're getting good at it,
Yeah.
That stretch is getting from Boston to Pittsburgh. That's it. That's all you do of the journey there, and the rest of it is elided between summer and fall on the way to Tommy's out in Montana or something, right?
It's Wyoming.
Wyoming.
It's right next to Colorado.
Right, Wyoming. And so most of that journey you don't see. You see the, specific minutia of daily life of traveling through this horrible broken world there, and that is one of the most powerful things about it, because I think The Last of Us is an amazing exercise in world building. Mm-hmm. It feels like one of the most breathing, alive, lived in apocalypses I've ever seen. And part of that is that, you just have to go day by day with Ellie through this world, getting, this very short distance overall in your journey. And these horrible things happen, and these mundane things happen, and you might have a big, firefight stealth section, and you might also have a big section where you've got to go find a dumpster and bring the dumpster over here, and then have Ellie go up on the dumpster, and you go up on the, and that sort of thing, that 99% of games would never bother with that.
Yeah.
They would do that in a cutscene or something, for obvious reasons, but The Last of Us needs to do that to make you feel the world.
Yeah, because it's so much a story about those characters. Like, that is the story of The Last of Us. It is Joel and Ellie. It is not, like, it's not really a plot-based story. It's like, you have the setup in the premise of, oh, Ellie needs to get to the Fireflies to get the cure for the virus, and that's, like, what they tell you at the beginning of the story to sort of set off the journey. But one detail I love with that, to, like, kind of signal to you that this is not really a plot story, it's a character story with, like, themes between the characters, is Joel doesn't give a fuck from minute one. Joel couldn't fucking care less about a cure for humanity. And, like, so as soon as he signals that, that's off the table. Like, it's like, there's no meaningful plot choice there,
And the usual thing in a story like this is that Joel might start there, but by the end he'd be a true believer, and he would die for Ellie in his last gasps of life, getting her to the Fireflies so she could save the day or something. Like, that's like Children of Men, which is a phenomenal movie, not by any means like a cheap out kind of apocalypse story, but that's literally the whole thing with the Clive Owen character in that movie is like, by the end, at the beginning he's very jaded, doesn't think humanity is worth saving, and at the end he's going to literally die for this tiny sliver of hope. And that's not what The Last of Us ever... His motivation is never at any point in the game, I think we should save humanity with a cure for the... It's almost laughable to say it.
Yeah.
Because that's so removed from Joel's thoughts.
Yeah. Well, it never really gets inside of Joel's head like that. It's all, at least not directly, it's all always assumed. But one of the things I found really interesting about sort of what you were talking about, Sean, where he doesn't really care about humanity being saved. By the end of the game, I didn't care about humanity being saved because you kill way more humans than you do zombies in this game. Mm-hmm. There are way more problems with humans being pieces of shit than zombies being a problem. And I think for someone like Joel, who's been a survivor for, 20 years?
Yeah.
That's, in his mind, he obviously doesn't care about humanity. He cares about himself, and by the end he cares about Ellie, but that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. This is adjacent to the zombie genre, I would say. But I don't think it's a zombie game. And I don't think it's a zombie story, because I don't think the game cares that much about the zombie side of it.
I'm
does
going to
it well.
stop you right there, Jonathan. That is literally every zombie thing ever.
Okay.
That is something that people
No.
say about every piece of zombie fiction they like.
I was gonna get
it's
to
not
that.
a piece of zombie fiction, because it's not about the zombies. It's about the people.
But I was going to get to that.
Okay.
But I think this game does it. I think in our moment does it more than lip service. And I'm not saying other things outside of our moment have not done it more than lip service.
Yeah.
I just mean that, like, for instance, let's talk about, like, The Walking Dead.
Okay.
You know? Like, I haven't seen a ton of that show, but I know what that show is.
I have not seen any of that show.
And The Walking Dead, obviously, is a show that tries to espouse the same thing of, like, the zombies are bad, but really this is about interpersonal conflict between people. And I guarantee you, 99% of that audience is not there to see whether, you know, Rick and his son are going to make up from the fight they had, or something, you know?
Right.
And I guarantee you the show doesn't really care about that
It doesn't.
at the speed it moves through human characters.
Not at all.
What
I've
you're-
seen 3 seasons.
Yeah.
It's a piece of... Well,
Yeah.
it's not good, but aside
what-
from that, it doesn't care.
Well, okay, but then you've seen more of it than I have. Would you agree with the statement that people are there for Greg Nicotero's makeup effects
Yeah,
to see
people
the
are-
cool gore and the zombie stuff?
People are there and people die to keep people watching. It's not about
Yeah.
making any kind of statement about what people are actually like.
I do think The Last of Us entered into the conversation in a moment where the zombie genre was resurgent because of things like The Walking
Yeah,
Dead.
this was a year after the first season of the Telltale game. Yeah.
And
It's
so
not great.
obviously all these ideas were coming back into play, but I think The Last of Us really puts its money where its mouth is in it's not trying to have its cake and eat it too. The zombies are there like the brutes are there in Halo to break up the elites. And the elites are the humans. They are the main threat in the game. They're the main theme in the game. And the game is not called The Walking Dead. It's
Right.
called The Last of Us. It's about what, you know, literally have we become as the dregs of a broken society, and what choices does humanity make as it, increasingly over the course of this story, but also the 20 years that have passed, is not the top of the food chain anymore, is not the most important thing on planet Earth. That giraffe scene that we will talk about, that
Yeah.
everyone's talked about, much of the point of that scene to me is that, oh, Earth's fine. Earth is fine. The biology of Earth is going to be okay. We are having some problems, but it's a different thing. And I just think, you know, the amount of critical interrogation the game genuinely does on that, and asking you, not just does humanity deserve to be saved, but like, not presenting Joel's choices at the end as a binary good-evil thing, but a very, very complex choice made in a world where the larger things don't so much matter anymore, is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think it like harkens back to like good zombie fiction. Like I can't say anything about the Walking Dead TV show. I will take Thomas's word on it. And then my experience with the first season of the Telltale game, where I liked like 2.5 of the episodes of that 5-episode series, and the rest of it was not for me. It's because I think it does get wrapped up in that like focusing too much on the zombies and not using the zombies in the right sort of like thematic way, and then not focusing enough on the way that the human like interpersonal relationships evolve, because it does the thing of we're going to have to kill off so many characters constantly. But yeah, with The Last of Us, I think one of the things with the way that it handles the zombie premise specifically that I love so much is that it takes this very natural look at it, of that it is not like, it's not like going to happen, you know, like cordyceps, like it's not that simplistic. But the core concept of here's this thing, this fungus that exists in real life that like affects insects, mostly ants, called the cordyceps fungus, and does the fucking zombie thing. Like the ant gets infected by it, the fungus gets into its brain, the fungus basically forces an ant to climb up a tree, and then the fungus sprouts out the top of its head and dumps a bunch of spores down to then infect more ants. And that's the life cycle of like a normal cordyceps fungus. And so that's something that exists in the world, and its biology is basically understood. And so translating that to, well, what if that just happened to humans? Again, that's not such a like simple thing to actually happen in the real world, but it has enough of a grounding to feel like, oh yeah, if humanity was going to go, like it would go away like this. Like it's the sense of that the natural world very easily could dispose of us at some point, whether it's like a fungus thing or whether it's just the climate changing, whatever it is. Nature is more powerful than humanity is ever going to be.
It's kind of like, I remember you saying this on the podcast once, that like one of the key buy-ins on the Mass Effect series is that there is this thing in the world called the Mass Effect.
Yes,
the way to manipulate the element zero. That is scientific horseshit. But you take that one little leap, and then everything else is believable because it's rooted in something scientific that they can build on. The Last of Us does that too, and that's one of the things like good science fiction does, is that you have a little fiction element, but you do that to build a bunch of science, storytelling.
Yeah, it is that like absurd what if question of what if the cordyceps fungus just evolved and could affect humans, which is something that is that's not going to fucking happen. But if you just accept that one premise, then the rest of it follows pretty naturally from that point.
Exactly. And it's even an interesting thing because I found because I love, the game is set 20 years into this thing, which also is much deeper than most apocalypses go, right?
Yeah, that's like one of the key things is that Ellie has only ever lived, she's like 15 years old, so she's been born and only lived this life after the apocalypse has happened, which is really important.
And the most famous examples of the zombie genre tend to be immediately after.
Yes, that's like all the Romero stuff is like immediately after, and then maybe like a couple of years in, I think, is when Land of the Dead takes place.
And so The Last of Us has to really imagine a full 20 years, like a generation later. So as you say, there are adults or young adults like Ellie who have only ever known this, can only understand the world as it used to be through stories that older people tell them.
Yeah.
And that also means that they have to build out the world around that and really think about how would humans have built civilizations if they have it all? Where would there be hope? Where would there be darkness? But also, like, what would the world just kind of look like? And one of my favorite things is what would the cordyceps virus continue doing to people? And that's how they allow to have different enemy types.
Yeah.
Is you have the basic, runners, which are recent, the clickers, which are, years later, and the head has, like, blown up like the movie Annihilation.
Yeah.
And then, like, the bloaters who have been around forever and ever. But you also get this sense of, like, okay, but in another 20 years, who knows? They all might be dead. That might not be much of a thing anymore.
Yeah, maybe that like evolutionary strain is not actually viable for reasons we don't know yet.
Yeah, maybe we just stop going to the places where they are. Maybe, like, it's both unsettled and settled in a way that feels so hyper-realistic that it's very immersive. More so than I think a lot of, science fiction like this tends to be.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Thomas?
I mean, yeah. Well, just one of the things we were talking about, like, even if Joel doesn't care about the cure, another thing to consider is if they did cure it, would it do any good? Because, like, in 20 years, would it matter anymore? Like you were saying, Jonathan, or would they move away, or would the cordyceps virus just stop doing anything? Or it's not. I don't think that's an important part of the story, but it's interesting to think about.
I also like to try to think about what are they planning to do with the cure. There's a little bit of like, I think you're supposed to kind of, you're not supposed to take the Fireflies at their word in this game, obviously, but like, does that mean like they go and like, do they inoculate everyone? Do they like, are they able to reverse the process on ones who it's already happened to?
Well, they can't reverse it on clickers.
No.
Obviously.
Yeah, I think people who are like infected are dead for sure, no matter what cure it is.
But I just like that like, there is this assumption that I do think, especially when you start hearing some of the audio logs and you realize it's not as like set in stone as they're telling Joel and Ellie, you're supposed to question like, okay, it would be good to have an inoculation for this, but there's like no step 2 to that plan yet, which is interesting. But it's also like that's speculation. It's not what the game is about or cares about, right?
But it's part of the underlying world building that not only the game does, but you do as you play through the game.
Yeah, it's like what you were saying of that, playing through the experiences from Joel's perspective makes you lose faith in humanity the way that he has lost faith in humanity, to the point where all 3 times I played through this game, I get to the end, and I get to that scene where you're in the operating room and you have to, like, kill the 3 doctors, and I just do it immediately without a question, because it's like, fuck these people. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, I just can't bring myself to give a shit about any of this stuff. It's like way too late at this stage for Joel as a character to come back from this, and for the world to come back from this.
Well, while we're here, I want to ask you about that, Sean.
Okay.
Because when Thomas beat the game, he texted me. At first, he just said, whoa, or something like, whoa.
I think I texted that to you several times.
Yeah.
There's also the time when Sam and Henry die.
Yes.
That was a whoa moment.
There's a couple, especially the closer you get to the end of the game, it's a lot of like,
holy shit.
Motherfucking goddamn it. But you texted me, well, and then I said, yeah, pretty good. And you said, what do you think about Joel's choice? And I said, I think what makes it narratively and thematically brilliant ending to me is that it is the only possible choice that person, as established in this game and in its world, could possibly make in that scenario as laid out. Mm-hmm. It is the epitome to me of a difficult but utterly in-character moment. Like, anything else would feel so utterly false for that character that, like, the morality question of it is, like, kind of less interesting to me than the look at what a good piece of, like, thematic and narrative, build-up this is to this horrifying thing he winds up doing. But I remember, Sean, when on episode 54, 200 episodes ago, you had a full-throated defense that Joel did the right thing.
I don't remember what the defense was now.
Okay.
I mean, I think,
I was wondering if you were going to be able to recite it.
Joel doing the right thing could mean a lot of different things.
Yes.
So it's like, obviously Joel does the right thing for himself because this is, I know that this was my, like, main interpretation of the game then, and it has not changed now, is that the game, The Last of Us, I think, is unquestionably a game about survival, which is, I think that makes it so compelling a game, is that is true both about its gameplay and about its story. Mm-hmm. That the game is all about, like, scrounging up as much, like, bullshit as you can to keep, like, some med kits and some ammo together and getting through these, like, some pretty brutal combat encounters with some asshole people that you have to stomp their face in or smack their face in with a brick. I killed a lot of people with bricks this time through.
Yes.
And so that's true of the gameplay, and that's the defining trait of the gameplay, is that it's basically a survival, like a light horror, but definitely survival shooter. And then the story is all about Joel as a person who is, as he repeatedly tells people throughout the story, he's a survivor, or he tells Ellie, we are survivors. All he cares about is surviving, because that's the point he's at now. He loses his daughter at the beginning of the game. You get the little intimations from Tommy in that really good scene where he finds Tommy, his brother, again, and they talk a little bit about, like, all I have is nightmares from those years, man. It's like, and Joel is insistent that, like, you survived because of me, but that survival came at a cost. But Joel is the guy who is always willing to pay that cost to survive, and so one really important key thing that the game does to set up the fact that Joel, in order to survive, Joel needs to save Ellie, is that when they meet Henry and Sam, that's when you see, I think it's Henry that kills himself. Is Sam? No, Sam is the older brother, I think.
Sam's the little brother.
Sam's the little brother.
The older brother kills himself.
Yeah, so the older brother, I think Henry kills himself right in front of Joel, and that's the first time you get the smash to black, like, fall sort of screen, and the last thing you see in Joel's face is he is horrified, which is by far the most emotion he's ever expressed. Like, even when he knows that Tess is dying, I guess, like, the most emotion he's ever expressed, that's not just, like, snarling anger, because even when Tess is dying, he's not sad about it, he's not, like, weeping, he's not despondent about it, he's just angry, and he's a little bit more angry than he's always been up to that point in the game, right? And this is the, like, presumably the person he cares most about in the world at that point in the story is Tess. But he sees Henry shoot himself and take this option that to Joel is basically unthinkable, and puts together that connection of that Henry had that personal relationship to Sam, which is what kept him going. As soon as Sam is dead, Henry has no choice basically but to kill himself. And now Joel has put himself in that exact same situation with Ellie. And so when you get to the end of that story, it is effectively a choice between Joel saving Ellie and damning humanity, or Joel committing suicide. Those are the two choices he has, and Joel will never kill himself. The only choice that Joel will ever make is to survive.
Yes, there is. That's what I mean about it being so in character.
Yeah.
It is literally unthinkable to see him doing anything else. And, you can call that, like, Joel is really selfish at the end of this game or something. But I think it goes so beyond, like, those sort of, like, moralistic qualifiers. To me, we do see Joel show emotion one other time, of course, which is the opening of the game, right?
Yeah.
And that is a symbolic death for him. He literally loses everything that is important to him. Because he's already, you see in subtle ways, kind of lost a lot at the start of the game. Like, I mean the start, like the prologue.
Yeah.
That, like, his wife has left him, we know. He is working kind of a dead-end, job, it seems like, that does not satisfy him much.
Yeah. He has to stay out incredibly late and gets home at, like, midnight or something.
But he comes home and he has this one ray of sunshine, which is his daughter, and he lives for her, right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of guy he is. And if there is goodness in Joel, and I think there is real goodness in this man, that's where it comes from, is this, like, ability to feel that, like, intense like love for someone, which you can read in the cynical way of it's a self-fulfilling thing of like he needs to feel needed or something. Mm-hmm. But that's who he is, and he dies on that night. And the Joel we meet 20 years later is in so many ways not the same man who started there, you know?
Yeah.
Because if you were able to survive 20 years of this apocalypse, you would be a different person. Just fundamentally.
There's a reason why all the adults in this game are fucking assholes, right?
Yes.
Because they've all had to go through that.
Yeah. And you get to the end of the game, and really what it is you start to think about, like, there really is only so much you can ask a person to lose, right? And I think that's one of the other themes of this game is how much loss is too much loss for life to be worth it. For, like, you know, if you are down to the last of us, as the title tells us, you know, what has meaning, what doesn't, what are the things that keep people going, what are the things that stop them from going in the case of Henry shooting himself, and it literally is like, Joel could not survive having the blanket torn out from under him again. He literally could not survive it. Whether it's committing suicide or just wandering off into the wilderness or something and just going feral, which I could also see Joel doing.
Yeah.
You know, who knows?
Some might say he's already gone feral.
He's already
pretty feral.
I mean, of course, yeah, because there is also the major theme of there. At a certain point, you start to realize, oh, these like villainous hordes I'm fighting, I'm the villainous horde because I'm more powerful than all of them because I'm the guy surviving all this.
Yeah, there are definitely some really good moments once you get out of that summer section where you kind of, like, especially when you get to the winter stuff, and you get to kind of see Joel from another light and, like, kind of get to revisit him again. And, like, because you've gotten so used to Joel's such a nice quote-unquote guy taking care of Ellie. And it's like, oh, they have this nice relationship. And then it's like you have to recontextualize, like, right, he is going around murdering people. And as soon as you have that great cutscene where after Ellie has been taken by David and Joel is on his own having to find Ellie, and he's just torturing. He just tortures people. And with, like, no qualms, no hesitation, just tortures and murders two people, like two totally defenseless people.
Yeah. He tortures and murders them methodically in a way that makes it abundantly clear that he has done this before.
Oh, yes, many times.
Yeah, he has done this before.
One thing I'd like to say about going back to his choice at the end to kill all the fireflies.
Yeah.
I saw you, Jonathan, when you were first playing through the game. We were living in the same house at the time.
All right.
I saw that scene, but I hadn't seen most of the rest of the game. So I thought at the time, I was like, man, he really didn't think that through. That's not great. He killed humanity's last hope. But this time when I actually played through the whole game and I got back to that scene, I was on the same page as Joel. I think I said that to you, where, like, you know, have it, like, out of context looking at it, it's like, you know, maybe that sacrifice would have been worthwhile in the grand scheme of things. But Joel doesn't care about the grand scheme of things, and neither do you if you're playing along with him. And also, Joel's a really interesting protagonist, if you can... I'd call him the protagonist.
He's the protagonist.
He's not
being a protagonist does not mean being a good person.
Guy.
Yeah, it's far from it.
But he's an interesting character as a protagonist because he's not a completely blank slate that you project yourself onto, but he's quiet enough that his emotions sort of get projected onto you as you're playing. And I think that's really difficult for a lot of game developers to do, to have that balance of a protagonist who actually has a personality, but that you can also be sympathetic and empathetic with.
Yeah, I talked about this when the game came out, so probably on episode 54.
Yeah.
That I thought at the time, I think this might still be true, that The Last of Us has the least amount of ludonarrative dissonance a game of this size and scope could possibly have. Mm-hmm. I think there are indie games that have, you know, are even closer on that front in some ways.
Sure.
But they have less to juggle, you know? And I think other games have definitely challenged that notion and gone in other directions with it. But, you know, ludonarrative dissonance is the term, if you don't know, that's like a game theory term to describe the gap between what is going on in the gameplay and what you are supposed to take out of it narratively. It was invented or coined for a Naughty Dog game, for Uncharted 2. Is that correct?
Well, it was coined by Clint Hawking, specifically talking about Bioshock. But it got sort of like, as all critical, you know, discourse terms do, whether it's video game or otherwise, gets taken into the larger context of academic discourse around a subject, and then just gets kind of completely mangled to the point that's like sort of. But yes, it's like one of the major ways that people have heard that term. It's usually used to talk about Uncharted and how Nathan Drake goes around murdering people all the time, which is of course not really what he's doing based on the story, but based on the gameplay, he's shooting people.
There's like 1,000 people in those.
He kills like 1,000 people, but it's also, I feel like the video gaming critical discourse has moved far away from like that notion of ludonarrative dissonance at some point.
Well, yeah, now a
like,
lot of times you fight like bots and AI and stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, also just in the sense of like looking at Uncharted, I feel like we're kind of at this place of realizing, like he's not literally murdering hundreds of people, right? Like it's like it's a gameplay conceit in the same way that like you're watching a musical. It's like they're not literally walking around like in West Side Story singing and doing ballet in the middle of the streets of New York. You do realize it's not what's actually happening. It's just representative of different actions.
Yes, but it was a big conversation still in
2013, for sure. That was maybe at like the peak of it being,
and that's my point,
passed around on YouTube. Yeah,
because it is an interesting thing to talk about. I think that whether the term we like it or not, because I knew it from the Uncharted 2 discussions, and it is, and I think Naughty Dog knew it too. I don't think there's any way to look at The Last of Us and not think that was in some way an implicit or explicit like response to that criticism of like. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong at all with Uncharted having combat, and it is okay to have combat in video games. And especially now, you look back and like games have diversified so much with what counts as combat in interesting ways. But yeah, like obviously Nathan Drake, you are not supposed to look at that game and say Nathan Drake is a man who has killed 1,000 people.
Nathan Drake is a mass murderer, and after that, he's an explorer.
Yes, you're not supposed to do that. In The Last of Us, you are 100% supposed to say like maybe Joel hasn't killed that many people, but he's killed a lot of fucking people. And he's done it violently, and when you take the actions in the game, like shivving someone in the throat, or strangling them to death,
or smacking their face in with a brick,
and then just pummeling the square button so that he beats them until his fists are bloody.
Yeah. Or taping a bunch of scissors to a lead pipe and jamming it in their skull.
Yes. Yeah. You are supposed to take that super literally for what is going on in the game, right?
Oh yeah.
And that is also one of those things that I do think makes The Last of Us feel very much of this generation and not the last generation, is that I think that gap has closed a lot. I think the idea of like, the representative actions in video games versus the literal actions in video games have merged kind of more and more. If you think of like some of the big hits of this generation, some of which are like fantasy, like The Witcher 3, where it's harder to find the line because none of this could be real, you know?
Yeah.
But like, that's a game you're supposed to feel like Geralt going out and like struggling against these, demons and things out in the world, and make it feel really like literal and weighty and meaty to you. I think The Last of Us is a very clear progenitor to something like that, where what you are doing in the world is absolutely meant to make you feel the things these characters are feeling. And in 2013, that felt somewhat revolutionary, just how committed the game was to that,
Yeah.
And it's what you're saying, Thomas, which is that you connect to Joel, both because of, I think, how they specifically pitch him and how good Naughty Dog's writing is, but also because of the gameplay. Because there is a marriage of gameplay and story here that is so tight you cannot separate them, and it's a really interesting accomplishment to me. And I think, for instance, of like the two big games in 2013 to me, not necessarily that these were the two best, but they were two of the best and biggest, and they were both AAA games, came out at the same time. Starred Troy Baker in a role where he had a teenage girl who was following him along, and he was playing a morally compromised character in a world that was broken and gone to shit. Yeah. The other one I'm talking about, of course, is Bioshock Infinite.
Yes.
I think Bioshock Infinite is a very good game. Bioshock Infinite is a last generation game.
Like,
very much. Yeah. The distance has felt clearer over time, and part of that is, I think Bioshock Infinite interrogates violence in some interesting ways, but that distance of like, no, you're not literally killing thousands and thousands of people in Sky Rapture. What was it called? Columbia?
Yes.
Columbia.
Good job.
I
would not have reproduced that.
I like Sky Rapture.
Yes.
But anyway, versus The Last of Us, where, this incarnation of Troy Baker, it's very real what you're doing, or it's meant to feel very real and representative. And it is just, I think, one very interesting way to think of and conceive of The Last of Us, because the amount of, I think, loyalty to that idea throughout the game of like, we're gonna make this feel real, like sticking to that, is still kind of rare for a game that wants to be that experiential and also be a popular AAA game.
Oh yeah.
Saying this to Thomas, it is bizarre to me that The Last of Us is a game that sold 20 million copies.
Yeah.
It's like wonderfully bizarre. I love that we live in that world, because a movie like The Last of Us would never make that much money.
No.
Ever. No. Or even a TV show probably. But like in a video game, you really can tackle this adult content in these very interesting experiential ways. And it is one of those things that, 5 years later, if the game has not just aged well, but maybe gotten better with time, it's some of that, of going back into it and feeling like everything in this game is really making me feel like I'm a part of this world. And it's not just that the combat and the stealth encounters are really smart in making it feel visceral, and the challenge is so perfectly modulated, but it's also that there's a lot of time of just walking around and being in silence, and that balance is very important. I'll also say, Sean, you and I played it on Survivor difficulty this time.
Yes.
And that...
So you ended up bumping it up?
Yes. I started on hard, and then it was too easy for me after 2 playthroughs, so I bumped it up to Survivor. Survivor's the way to play this game.
It's so good.
It's the definitive version of this game.
I'm almost kind of upset at myself because because now I'm not going to be able to play The Last of Us Part 2 with like listen mode on.
No.
It's just not going to be possible.
No, I'm going to play it on Survivor.
Once you break that, you can't. I don't think you can go back.
Because here's the weird thing, Sean. It actually becomes easier in some ways for me. In that... Not that like literally the enemy difficulty goes down. It doesn't. Right. It goes up. But that being freed from that like last remaining major video game mechanic vestige, which is he has magic hearing.
Yeah, he basically is Daredevil.
Yeah. That's the most like ludonarrative dissonant thing in the game, right?
Yeah.
In its basic form. Is you divorce yourself from that, and now you are so in that world and feel so like attuned to it. Like I was paying attention to the sound design much more than I had on past playthroughs, and I just discovered kind of a logic and a layout to the almost puzzle-esque elements of how these different encounters are laid out. That part of it was I was familiar with those encounters from past playthroughs, but also like just making myself not rely on that made them much more interesting to play. In some cases, I got through them much faster because of it, because I was having to not like overplan things. I was having to not like be able to rely on all these other data points I had. It was, you're here, you've got a brick, you've got a bullet in your gun, see what you can do.
Yeah.
And it's exhilarating.
Yeah, and it's something that I think so goes to the testament of the quality of like the art and visual design in the game that it holds up that way. Because there are lots of games, it's extremely common for AAA games to have the, we call it detective, or I call it like Batman Vision or detective mode by default for a reason.
Yes.
Because Arkham had it, and then after Arkham had it, everything had it, because as graphics get more, advanced, they also get more complicated. And if they get more complicated, it's a lot harder to easily discern what's happening compared to, if you play an NES game that has like the most basic sense of like good visual design. It is very, very, very clear where the protagonist is, what like objects you can interact with are, where the enemies are. Like if you're, like think of Mario or like Mario 3, like it is immediately apparent as soon as you make a glance at the screen. You don't even have to look at it for like half of a second. Like barely look at that screen, you know immediately all those qualities if you have any familiarity with the game at all. With most modern AAA games, this is like in some ways only gotten worse, or like it continues to be a significant issue with graphical design. Is that like I played Far Cry 5 earlier this year, and if you just glance at the screen in Far Cry 5, and unless you're like right up in front of an enemy and are able to pick out where all the enemies are, like you have fucking amazing vision, my man, because that is hard to do. And the good thing about like a Far Cry game is they make that part of the gameplay that it is like a stealthish kind of game, so spotting enemies is supposed to be somewhat difficult. That's why they have all the foliage. But still, there are so many handicaps that game will give you in terms of spawn, like, being able to tag enemies, or you can take these different syringes you can craft that automatically tag enemies on your screen that happen to use the binoculars. All sorts of little things, or think of like The Witcher and having to investigate crime scenes. All that stuff is such a necessity because it's so hard to be able to pinpoint that shit.
Even Hitman has that.
Yeah, even Hitman has it, exactly. And so, although Hitman is a game that if you play on the professional difficulty, they don't give it that to you, and Hitman is another game that does a very good job in terms of its visual design because there's a lot of clarity there. But The Last of Us, that was something I was worried about. It was the reason why the second time I played through it, I did not do Survivor, is because I was like, just telling me you can't use that listen mode.
It's literally one of the most fundamental mechanics in gaming today.
Yes.
3D gaming.
Yeah.
It is.
So my instinct's just like, I can't play this game without my Batman vision. Like, are you crazy? That sounds absurd. And then when you take it away, and it's like, it's like watching a movie without subtitles and being able to understand what people are saying, basically. It's just like, I can just look at things. Oh my god, it's such a revelation. I can just look at this scene and understand what I'm looking at, and like, things are distinct and clear, and I understand where things are, and I don't need to rely on this listen mode to highlight things all the time. I can just rely on my normal vision and on the audio design to let me know if there are enemies around. And then also, it highlights the usefulness of having Ellie or the other companion characters you meet in the game that will, like, give you combat barks that will point out, like, oh, there's a clicker over there, there's, like, somebody behind that truck or whatever. You know, like, that information becomes useful in a way that you can just ignore it when you have the listen mode on. And so all that stuff is such a testament to the quality of the, like, raw game and encounter design and visual design that Naughty Dog has. That survivor mode it's once you do it, you can't go back. It's just like, I have broken listen mode in Last of Us Part 2. I'll never be able to play that game that way now.
No, I almost think... Because I was telling Thomas he should play it on hard, because I think you need this game to push you, right?
Yes, yeah. You need to have, like, pressure on your resources, or else part of the game doesn't work, I think.
And I was saying to Thomas, you know, hard is like heroic in Halo. That's what it's made for.
Yeah.
I don't think that. I think Survivor in this is like heroic on Halo. Like, that's really what this game is made in. And then everything else is some kind of adaptation to make it so that, again, 20 million people could enjoy the game. Because I can also understand if you're listening to this and then saying, yeah, but you guys are fucking masochists for that. Oh, yeah, I get it. It's really hard in Survivor.
Yes, and it's a drum I will always beat. It is a flag I will always carry on this fucking podcast. Difficulty options are good, and games should have difficulty options.
Yes.
Like, there are very, 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 very few exceptions to that, and it usually is something of, like, you know, something like Dark Souls with, like, the online aspect of the game makes that difficult. This is like, there are some games that, like, you know, you can have... There are like technical reasons for why that would be very difficult to implement. Most games that is not the case, and so something like, it's come up on several times on this podcast, of like the launch version of Breath of the Wild didn't have any difficulty modes, and that really pissed me off because I became so powerful in that game so quickly if you know, kind of know what you're doing with it. Same thing with Lord of the Rings Shadow of Mordor. If you've played Batman Arkham Combat, that game is fundamentally broken without any difficulty options. And The Last of Us is a game that does difficulty options perfectly. That when you ramp up the difficulty, the game materially and substantially changes in ways that is more than just like health bars increase or like damage done increases or decreases. You know, it is more significant than that. It changes the way that you play the game.
Thomas, I think you had a story about the combat barks.
Well, yeah.
I knew you had told me this and I heard you laughing.
Well, Sean, when you said that, I was like, I never thought about that because... When you mentioned the combat barks, I was like, I played it on hard, like Jonathan said. I actually thought it was too easy on hard.
Okay.
I think I told you this. I wound up having pretty much full ammo at the end of the game because I was like, I gotta save my ammo for everything.
I still did on Survivor.
Okay, but
which makes the last fight in the game so much fun.
It's so much fun though, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was out by the end, and it was still fun. But yes,
yeah.
I'm an obsessive with like if I could kill something with my bare hands, I did as a like rule. It's like it was very rare that I was the dame to pull out a gun.
Especially with Ellie, actually, my main strategy was throwing a brick at someone and then jumping on them.
There you go. Good, well done. Yes.
As a result of that, I had full ammo with Ellie in the brief section you played as her too. Anyway, about the combat barks, I never thought of them as being useful because I did have that listen mode. There was the very first like tough stealth encounter you have in the game is you're in that like underground mall with all the clickers.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's when you have both Tess and Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
And Ellie has really good AI, I think, as a companion. She mostly sort of, you could believe that she's staying out of the way.
Yeah, obviously the game fudges it quite a bit, but it's good enough.
Yeah, if she gets spotted, it doesn't matter.
99% of the time you don't think about it, and that's what you want.
Yeah, yeah.
But Tess does not have good AI, it turns out. In that mall, because it was the first time I encountered clickers, I was like, I gotta be so fucking quiet right now. And Tess is... Every time I move anywhere, she sprints full speed across the room, making as much noise as possible, knocking over shelves and shit, and the clickers don't notice her, and the whole time I'm on the edge of my fucking seat thinking, Tess, you're so fucking bad at this, why wouldn't you shut the fuck up?
I think they should do that in the Last of Us movie that they keep wanting to make. Just have like Joel like, all right, Ellie, come on, and they crawl across, and then like Joel. No, what I want is like Joel like hits a piece of broken glass like,
And gets up against like a piece of cover, like it like holds his breath and like peeks over the top to make sure that nobody noticed.
And then it's like, Joel! And Tess just running across, knocking shit over, and then like does a power slide right next to them, like, you guys okay? And then you just hear like, rah! And all the clickers come at them, and that's the end of the movie, and Mark Wahlberg gets eaten.
Well, here's the thing. It was sad when Tess died. It was like, oh man, that sucks. But I was like, I know exactly why she died. She's terrible at this. She's really bad at
that's
this.
what, maybe she had already been bitten by that point. That was the reason. She was so distracted. It's like, I just don't have my head in the game.
Yeah.
That reminds me of my favorite example of something like that's outside of The Last of Us is playing the Spec Ops mode on Modern Warfare 2, which is basically like a co-op mode. And one of the missions was like you are sniping people from like 2 miles away on top of this like snowy summit. And I was playing with my friend Kurt, and we were sniping these guys. But they didn't ever calibrate like the audio or like do different takes of like the different audio cues that people have for this mission where you're literally 2 guys like on the side of a mountain sniping people like half a state away from you. And so it's like you fire a couple of shots, reload, and the guy just yells out at the top of his lungs, I'm reloading! It's like, ammo over here! It's like, it's just us! We're like in the fucking Alps, my man! Like, what? You're gonna cause a fucking avalanche! Yeah, games sometimes have issues with the specifics, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. That did not happen to me in the underground part this time with Tess.
That happened to me, yeah.
With Tess. But because what happened this time is I got into that segment having multiple Molotov cocktails, and I was like, maybe I can get this to work. Because that's a really hard part. It's one of my favorite combat encounters because you're in the dark. There's it's the first time a ton of clickers are thrown at you.
Yeah, there's like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
So it's not super obvious where you're going either.
No, you have to get to the end of it, and then there is another. Like you have to take out the last clicker. You cannot be completely stealthy.
Yeah, and there's like a bunch of good shit. Like there's a safe in there that you need to get the code for. There's some good stuff in there that you want to scrounge for.
And it's hard. And so but I was like, I'm going to go for it. And there's this clicker who like walks by the hall where you start, and I'm staying very still. And right as he passes me and like his back is turned, I just chuck the Molotov cocktail at him. He starts screaming, but he's burning. He gets over to one corner and just burns alive. But that brings a bunch of other clickers over. They catch fire. More of them are burning. Once enough are over, but the flames are dying down, I throw the second Molotov cocktail, and I burned most of the zombies in that room in like just 2 moves with the Molotov cocktail, and I do have a picture of it with the game's picture mode, which is still my favorite fucking thing about it.
I think it was the first of the Sony first-party photo modes. I think this was the one that started the trend.
I still think it's the best, but we can talk about that.
It's very good.
Yeah, but anyway, and I have a dramatic black and white photo of just a heap, like you could like stand on it and it would elevate you, of like charred, burned cordyceps bodies.
Yeah, I think what I did there is I took the brick that I always have. You always have the brick.
Yes.
And just walked up, smacked that first fucking clicker in the face 3 times with the brick and killed it. Then just like walked backwards, let Ellie and Tess deal with all the clickers that are running in and just wait for a bunch of them to assemble and then throw the Molotov cocktail. And I burned I had to reload a couple of times, but one time I got it where it's like basically almost all of them in the room got taken out in that one, and then I just found another brick and beat the shit out of the last one. It was good.
But the thing about the game's difficulty, and I think this is true, hard, survivor, whatever, and Thomas, I want to hear your thoughts about this playing it for the first time, is I think this game is at its best. Enjoyable is a weird word to use for this, but most enjoyable, most
satisfying.
Satisfying. When you are up against the wall, you really don't know what to do. Like, you have, like, a significant hurdle in front of you, like, you are under ammoed or something, or just there's a lot of guys and you're not sure how to approach it, and you start to work out of some level of desperation. That to me is, or like, you are crouching like, low to the ground as you can be, moving that analog stick as lightly as you fucking can.
And Tess comes stomping across the fucking room.
Joel! No, but like Tess removed, those are the moments that to me are like the most memorable about The Last of Us, and the combat really gets the workout it needs, because there's a lot of those in the game, where it's like, I'm just barely tilting that analog stick. The best one for me on this playthrough was the last encounter with zombies in the game, which is the beginning of spring as you're going through that flooded tunnel in Salt Lake City, before the part where Joel and Ellie almost drown. And I had forgotten, like, that is such a ludicrous gauntlet they throw at you. And
there's like 3 bloaters in a row or something.
There's 3 bloaters. 2 of them are standing right next to each other, right by the part you need to get to. There is a side you can crawl along, but it has multiple clickers standing there. There's clickers and runners everywhere. It is literally a scenario where I think on Survivor, there's no way you could take out every zombie in that area.
No, I snuck past them.
I snuck past them, too.
I didn't take out any of them, yeah.
Yeah, but
I took out 1 bloater just because I had so much flamethrower ammo. I'm like, fuck it. I just want to light this fucker up. I never use the flamethrower. I just want to fucking, have a barbecue.
I didn't find the flamethrower this time.
Really?
Yeah.
It's in the Colorado University section.
Eastern Colorado University.
I guess I just forgot to grab it. I didn't need it.
I never used it.
Yeah, it's only really effective for some of the infected stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, but that section, I just remember, it's a lot, and it's also a huge. It's one of the bigger areas they give you because most of the areas in The Last of Us for combat encounters are fairly compact.
Yeah, because it's like that sort of stealth thing you need, all the ways to break line of sight.
Exactly. And in this one, this is a big area with some branching paths and places you can go. There's a tunnel in the back. And I did take out a couple along the way, but it's tough because you have to move very precisely or else one wrong move and they're swarming at you. And there's really no way to fight them off.
Especially the width of the tunnel does make it that if you make one mistake in there in the stealth, basically everything in that room is going to rush you.
Yeah. But the final step for me was I got around in such a way that I was able to get near the end and then you can get to the far left side of the tunnel and you can sneak past everything, including the bloaters, until right next to the bloaters is a clicker just standing there waiting. And I was able to, I had a shiv, and it was, I'm going to sneak, grab, stab.
Yeah.
Did anyone hear? Okay, let's go. I just agonizingly slowly get over there. And then once Ellie was lowering down the ladder, I was finally able to exhale. And those are the moments where it's the exhale that makes The Last of Us great. Because so few games hit that level of the exhale, as I call it, of just oh God, that was brilliant, but hard.
Yeah. In that vein, something that was nice about having played it before is, I know how much I need and I can sort of calculate in my head. I know I'm going to start getting more ammo for this gun or something. It's I can start using this here. And it was specifically knowing how you don't really have that many combat encounters with Ellie in the winter section. Let me be you know what? I'm just going to fucking use this shit. And that was maybe some of the most fun I've had with the combat in this playthrough was in that Ellie winter section where I just made no real effort to obsessively keep everything. So I just because they don't give you many arrows, especially if you're playing on Survivor. You have I think 2 arrows throughout most of that section.
And the bow's not great.
I played a lot of the multiplayer with the bow, so I got pretty good with it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you upgraded it, if you upgrade it the whole way, it's really good.
Yes, yeah. When you get it in Bill's Town, it fucking sucks for sure, because it takes a minute to fucking draw.
Well, and even at its best, it's not a cool power bow and arrow like Tomb Raider. It's not meant to be your primary mode of attack.
No, but it is the only way that Ellie can kill people totally stealthily, because, her knifing thing makes a bunch of noise because she stabs a dude a dozen times.
She has to jump.
Yeah, she jumps up and just oh, fuck this guy, you asshole! It's really good. I really like playing as Ellie in this game. But yeah, so I ran out of arrows pretty early, and then it and the thing that especially did it was when it autosaved right around when I ran out of arrows. I'm oh fuck, I guess now it's I pull out the fucking shotgun and it's here we go, and it is very fun to play the game in that way of especially on Survivor where you can't take many hits because it doubles the amount of damage you take. It is fun to have to scrounge that way and decide I could probably just sneak past these guys and not kill any of them. I've played enough stealth games at this point. I could do that, but I do have 3 shotgun shells and full clip of this pistol. I might as well start kind of doing the cat and mouse thing, blow dude's head off with the shotgun, run into this house, wait for them to come in, hit them in the face with the pistol, and then
it can really work well that way. It's surprising because I had never really played it that way before. I did a lot of that this time, and it works. This is one of those games where as much as I push on the combat system, I'm never feeling it sync. It's always pushing back. It always has a response to whatever crazy way you want to play it. whether it's a super difficult section or not. And as frustrating as it can get sometimes, because I think one of the hardest rooms in the game is the section where before you know David is a bad guy, and you and David are trying to get through that big wood factory, and you get into that last room, and you're stuck there. And you're stuck in that room until the game unsticks you from that room. And that part is so ludicrously hard because you're also like way under ammoed at that point.
And the loader drops down at the end. And I had no ammo whatsoever when that happened.
But I also I got it down to it's like, you guys all know I have tried Dark Souls multiple times. I can't get into. I want to one day. I don't know.
You just have to persevere, my friend.
But I imagine this must be the sensation of what Dark Souls is like. Of by the end of that, I had that whole thing down to a fucking science.
Yes,
this here, that'll cause that. Then I can do this. And because it does mercifully autosave a couple of times in there for you. But one of them was an autosave right before this one guy drops down. And so the guy drops down, and what I would do is I would go up with a brick and kill him. And then 2 clickers would drop down, and I would grab a bottle, because the bottle was right next to me, and I would throw the bottle at the clicker, run up, stab it in the face, and at this point, if I had maneuvered myself right, the other clicker would go and attack David, and when it's attacking David, I don't need a bottle, I can just run up to it and stab it, because it's not paying attention to me, and I would have taken out the 3 of them without any ammo, and I still had some bottles left, and then I kind of had a plan for the next couple things, but it's and when you get that scientific accuracy down, it's really exhilarating.
Yeah, there's definitely something about and Survivor difficulty in certain sections like that one in particular really forces you to play this way of engaging more at the meta level of the game mechanics. That's a lot of fun. Of the I'm gonna walk around and maneuver right in this spot because I know it's gonna bring you close enough to David that it's gonna force you and David to be in melee combat, which means I can run up behind you and stab you with my butterfly knife. That apparently Ellie is the only person in the world that can use the butterfly knife. Yeah. And in engaging with all of that and knowing the minutia of you can throw, if you throw the brick, it will stun enemies, but for not as long as if you throw the bottle, and if you have an enemy stunned, it's just a 2-hit, take them down. Because on Survivor, having to fucking kill someone that has full health in Survivor difficulty with melee is absurd.
It's a lot.
It's 3 full chains of melee combos. It takes a minute of you just wailing the shit out of them. So it really forced me.
It's if you tried to beat someone to death in real life, that's
it's probably realistic.
Yeah. It's not the just I kind of get 4 good hits in and then smack them into the wall and they're dead. Yeah. It's a good dozen or so blows to the face before you can finally drop them. And so it really forces you to take advantage of everything you have available to you, which was when I played on hard, I was bricks all the time. If there was a bottle around, fuck it, I don't need a bottle. What's a bottle for? I got a brick. This time it's I'm going through bricks so fast that it made me understand the values and virtues of the bottle as an object in this game in a way I never noticed before, because it does leave them stunned for much longer if you throw it at them than the brick. And that's really nice. Yeah, because you don't have to on hard. Yeah. You never need the bottle on hard. All you need is
the brick and the bottle were the same.
No, they're very different, because also the bottle in a melee combo only does the 1 hit in the face and you can't take out a
I never tried to melee someone with a brick.
You didn't. Oh.
I thought it was just like a bottle. I thought it would break it.
No, man. If you both for the bottle and the brick, if you equip it and then try to melee with it, you will smack people with it.
Thomas, you weren't here when The Last of Us came out in 2013 on Twitter for the hashtag brick or bottle.
Yes, great debate. Yeah. And I hate to do this in our political moment, but I have to say I'm a centrist on that specific affair. Brick and ball are both good. They are good in different scenarios, and I will take fucking whatever I can get at this point. That's how I felt for most of The Last of Us.
I do, because you're right. I remember this is part of what convinced me to try it on Survivor this time, was realizing man, on hard, there's a lot of bricks and bottles around here, and I'm constantly just switching. I grab the bottle because it's shining, and then fuck, this is a bottle, and then grab the brick again. I would do that all the time, and I'm I wonder if in Survivor this feels different. And it does, because I want all those bricks and bottles at a certain point, because there are some scenarios where I'm going to learn where all of these things are, and I'm going to fucking use them.
Yeah, there is no more desperate feeling in a video game than ending a combat scenario and scouring the entire field looking for something for a brick or a bottle. And it's and just having that little slot empty with the little red 0 right down on the D-pad. It's just killed me every time it happens. Like, no, I feel naked. I need something. Because if you don't have a brick or a bottle, particularly on Survivor, since it's so hard to just melee kill someone with nothing, you're forced to use some resources. Like, you have to basically use a gun at that point. I don't want to have to use a gun, even though, this is a good segue, the gunplay in The Last of Us is really satisfying.
It's really good.
It's really good.
Yeah, there is something about the way that every single bullet you fire and is fired at you feels so impactful that is utterly unique to me. I don't think I've... Like, the closest is maybe Red Dead Redemption, just in the sense that all the guns in Red Dead Redemption were also semi-automatic.
Yes.
But that game is not designed... It's obviously a big open world game, so it's not designed in such a way to really put that pressure on you. And The Last of Us, like, being, like, forced to fire a gun feels so significant. It's like, I have to use these resources. The firing a gun is difficult because your aim swims unless you get, like, both of the upgrades. That's the only way that you can, and they're very expensive upgrades, that's the only way you can get, like, totally steady, dead-on aim. And a couple of the guns, like the semi-automatic pistol, the one with the clip has, you know, a fairly big reticle on it, and if you fire, that reticle bloom is pretty huge. So it's like... trying to, like, nail down the shooting in this game feels like having to get something under control to be able to use it.
I actually think Red Dead is a really good comparison, both for that reason of, like, Red Dead also encourages you not to just fire blindly everywhere because of that.
Well, if you don't have the bandolier running out of ammo, yes, that is true. Normal people playing that game have plenty of ammo in Red Dead Redemption, but...
Thomas, I don't know if you know, this is like our longest running podcast joke.
The bandolier?
Yeah,
that he didn't... Did you play Red Dead Redemption?
No.
Oh. Well, you can buy an item... Like, literally, it's available from the first time you can enter a shop in the game. You can buy an item called the bandolier that doubles your ammo count. And when Jonathan and I were living together in Boulder, I saw him playing basically at the end of that game and noticed he was constantly running out of ammo, and then noticed his character model looked weird, and then realized he'd never bought the bandolier because he didn't know that you could buy things at the shops in the game. He thought they were just there to rob, which is still one of the most inexplicable things. It would be like not realizing you could, like, pick up a brick in The Last of Us.
Well, that's inexplicable for anyone except Jonathan.
Yes,
who never goes into a shop in a video game to buy things.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm better at video games now than I was when I played Red Dead.
Let's, like, rewind this conversation back to the point where you said you never found the flamethrower in this playthrough, which is pretty absurd.
I don't...
That's kind of right.
It's not a great gun, but it's
I don't know, I just wasn't thinking about it.
You have to be pretty oblivious to be able to miss it. It's got a big red tank, which is why you never want to equip, because it always looks like there's something in the environment kind of capturing.
Yeah. Alright, but let me go back to what I was saying, though.
Yes.
Comparison to Red Dead. So it's that thing that the gunplay feels like very, like, meaty and weighty because these are, like, you are not having, like, military-style assault weapons.
Yeah, everything is semi-automatic. Yeah.
Right, yeah. But it's also, the other comparison is that because of that, the reload sounds in The Last of Us, as in Red Dead, I assume this is the closest I will ever come to the sexual pleasure an NRA member must feel when they reload a gun and hear that sound, because I do kind of get it. There's, like, just hearing, like, him put in the, like, rounds into the revolver or something in this game, or, like, when I'm loading, like, I'm getting ready to go into an encounter, I'm just checking all my guns to see if they're loaded, and I just hear that, like, putting in the shells on the shotgun or something, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And I do remember that from Red Dead as well.
It definitely has the, like, it makes guns feel significant.
It does,
in a way that games almost never do. Like, Red Dead Redemption does it big. Honestly, the other game, and this is probably where The Last of Us gets a lot of that from, is from Resident Evil 4.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 4 has a lot of that and has, like, really, like, meaty, interesting reload animations and, like, good sound design and all that. And the, like, you know, that's, like, literally a survival horror game, so it's a lot of having to feel like if you have to pull out a gun in this situation, that means you are very desperate to resort to that point. But it gives firearms a weight. In a way, that another game that does this is the Hitman, and one of the reasons why I love Hitman is, like, when you have to resort to, like, okay, I'm going to have to pull out a gun, especially if it's, like, a non-silenced rifle or something, that means, like, shit has gone down, like, I have to get to this point, and you're not constantly using guns in a way that if you're playing any other, like, you know, playing Uncharted or something, it's fine in those games that guns don't have that feeling to them, but it is something that makes you sort of, especially, like, with everything that's going on now in America, like, makes you reconsider the way that, like, guns are used in games and the way that you never really consider it or think about it. And The Last of Us, I think about it constantly.
I made the joke about, you know, the sexual pleasure of guns on reload, and it is a very good sound effect. But this is the thing, though: The Last of Us does not fetishize guns. in the way that most video games, and I don't even necessarily think this is like on a game-by-game basis a horrible thing. I'm not trying to be super moralistic about this.
Yeah.
I do think it's a sociological problem that the amount we fetishize guns.
Yeah, if we didn't, if America wasn't the way it was and like gun laws were not the way they were in America, it wouldn't be a problem. The way that like if you release a first-person shooter in Japan, nobody gives a shit.
No,
right?
Yeah, no one thinks that that's a like gross fetishization of guns because it's a fantasy thing to them anyway.
Yeah,
which is good. They have a healthy society in that way at least. So yeah, like, but in this game, when you are resorting to a gun, you do feel the weight of it, in part because, there's really very, very few moments in The Last of Us where you're ever going to be, like, firing, like, shoot, like, blindly, like, until you, empty the clip. There are, like, one or two times where you're, like, pushed to the extreme, like, in, like, a running section or something, where I would find myself kind of doing that. But I also would have, like, counted ahead of time and figured out that I was able to do that, It is one of those games where every bullet counts.
Yeah, and I love any game where I know constantly, like it is, like if any point of me playing The Last of Us you had walked over and asked me how much ammo I have for every single gun I hold, I could have told you, except for maybe the flamethrower because that's like a weird spectrum.
Thing,
yeah, it's like I could have told you exactly how many revolver shots I had, semi-automatic pistol shots I had, bolt-action rifle shots, shotgun shots, like the El Diablo or whatever the weird fucking revolver you get.
Love that one.
Yeah, all of those, like, but I just knew that on the top of my head at every single point playing that game.
Absolutely. I also love that it gives you quite a few guns over the course of the game, and you do use them all, because none of them, like, become so overpowered that, like, you definitely everyone's going to have preferences. My shotgun, if I could use it, was my main thing, because it is definitely the most efficient in a lot of ways, but, like, you're going to use all of those guns at some point. It's like Red Dead is a good comparison of like, I have 50 fucking guns in Red Dead or something. Most of them are not seeing any action when I'm going through playing that. But that's okay for that game. But like, yes, for this, like if I have like, there's like 4 or 5, sidearm kind of things.
Yes.
And I think 4 overall long gun things on the left-hand side.
The bow,
And you really do know all of those, what you're going to be using them with.
Yeah, and it is one of my favorite little things in the game is like basically everything to do with the backpack. I think is really well done. Especially Thomas, when you played the game and you got to Ellie's section where you can play as her in winter, did you look at what she had in the backpack?
Yes.
Yeah, that's. I like that she has items in the backpack that are hers, and like when you look at them, she comments on it, right? Like that. I like the sense of physicality that they are actually carrying all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And one of those great little details is you can, if you get the holster upgrade, you can have 2 guns of each type. Quick selected basically, but otherwise you have to like put your backpack down, go into it, and like pull out a different gun. And that's such a great mechanic. It's so smart of being like, especially at the beginning of the game where they give you the revolver and the semi-automatic pistol before you have a chance even to get the holster. And it's like, well, fuck. Like if I run out of ammo with one of these guns, and I only have 2 shots with the revolver and like 1 with the semi-automatic pistol. If I run out of revolver ammo in the middle of an encounter, I have to physically stop, get my backpack out, pull out that fucking revolver or the pistol and use it.
Well, even when you do get a holster upgrade or both the holster upgrades, you still want to be thinking ahead.
Yeah,
and the game forces you to do that for combat encounters. And you can get like crafting upgrades if you want to craft faster, like during combat. I never had enough pills or steroids or whatever for those. So I was also always thinking ahead with like, well, I have enough to make another like sugar bomb, and I probably would use that before I use another like Molotov cocktail or something. So I was always thinking about like crafting ahead of time.
Yeah, because one of the things they do is that every single resource you have can be used for multiple things.
Yeah,
which is such a great little like all the game design of this game is really smart in terms of like there's always a risk-reward kind of choice you're making. Yeah. And even down to that, like, do I craft this ahead of time or not? Because it's like I can either have a med kit right now or I can have a Molotov cocktail. And I don't know, especially if it's your first time playing, you have no idea what the fuck you're walking into. It's like I might desperately need a Molotov cocktail when I run into a bunch of clickers, or I might need a med pack if I'm fighting a bunch of hunters and I take some shots, Mm-hmm. And so you have to balance that decision in your head. And I love those little choices you have to make constantly.
I did definitely in Survivor find myself before every encounter, because we talked about this on the podcast a few weeks ago, that Last of Us is the exceptionally rare game where I could recite probably in order every encounter in this game and tell you what the layout is, and maybe even an estimate of the number of enemies because they are so etched in my memory. Not because I've played it a dozen times, I've only played it 3, but they're so memorable and meaty and well done.
Yeah.
But I would, before every encounter, I had my 2 holster slots because holster was the first fucking thing I upgraded because it's so useful, and I would be like, okay, which gun do I want here? Which do I want here? Make sure they're reloaded, because there was one encounter where I went to like shoot the clicker and it was just like, oh fuck, and he has to reload, and then the clicker like ate my face.
Yeah, because the reload animations are pretty long in this game, which is good.
And so I was like, oh shit. So I would like reload, get everything ready, look at my crafting, and be like, okay, let's do this. And it's like I had, some kind of plan, and the plan usually broke down. That's one of the other things I love about The Last of Us is that I don't, and maybe I'm just bad at it, but so tell me if I'm wrong. A lot of the time you will not execute whatever plan you think you're going in with perfectly.
No, I mean,
it's all about evolving, living like...
Yeah, it's that sort of stealth action thing, which particularly in 2013 when this came out was not like as common as it is now. Like, I feel like that is like, particularly Ubisoft has made that like the default video game genre in some weird way of like, you start an encounter in stealth and then halfway through shit goes crazy and it's like this big action thing.
Ever since they added the crouch button to Assassin's Creed, it's become really prevalent.
They added the crouch button to Assassin's Creed. It's like, we can make our Assassin game a stealth game too. Oh my god. Yeah. But it's like Far Cry is like that. I think Ghost Recon Wildlands is basically like that. Obviously, I think the first game in my mind that did this was Splinter Cell Conviction in like 2009, which was their first reboot of Splinter Cell. But like that, it's one of my favorite sort of things in a game like this is that sense of like, I can start out this encounter stealthy, and it is possible. There are definitely some situations where they have scripted in such a way where you cannot stealth it all the way through because some enemies spawn in that know where you are, which is fine. Like, but the majority of like the normal encounters in this game, you could stealth through them and like do a kind of ghost playthrough of those sections in The Last of Us. It is possible, but it is difficult, and it's difficult enough that it is worthwhile to say, no, fuck it. If something goes wrong, and now I just have to deal with this situation. And that's when The Last of Us gets really fun. That was the thing that was so great about the Last of Us 2 demo. I think we talked about on the E3 podcast was it highlighted that element of the game of like, you take out a couple guys stealth and it's good, but it's like, oh, that guy came up that hill and I wasn't really expecting that, and well, fuck, here we go. Like, pull out the gun, like running chase and get shot with a fucking arrow. Like this, oh my god.
Yeah.
That was one of the best things about Last of Us. I was sort of mentioning this at the beginning when I said it didn't feel like an old game to me. I think a lot of other stealth games, and, again, I'm not sure this is a stealth game primarily, but it can be played as a stealth game. But when games that have stealth actually have good combat too, that's pretty rare.
Oh yeah.
And even some of my favorite games, I really like stealth games. Dishonored is still one of my favorite franchises.
Yep.
That game does not have great combat.
Nope. Yeah, that is, I played that like either ghosting or like totally non-violent, like I'm going to knock people out and throw them in the cupboard, and if someone sees me, I'm reloading safe.
Yeah, if I play those games again, I always play it like, if I have to use anything other than my bare hands, I'm doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And in The Last of Us, sometimes I would try to do that, and then when it didn't work, I would be okay with it.
Yeah, stealth games also don't age great. Like, let's be honest about that.
Yeah, that's true.
Typically, or I shouldn't say age great. I think in a lot of ways they age faster than certain comparable genres.
Yeah, particularly because like older stealth games are so strict in so many ways.
Yes.
Like even like. And you don't even have to go that far back for some of them, like a Splinter Cell Chaos Theory that's like a great game. And that game came out, I think, 2004, 2005. It was right at the end of that Xbox generation. It's like, that game, you tried to go back and play that, it's like fucking, like, so strict with how it, like, mandates how you play the game in some sections.
Metal Gear Solid obviously being, like, the patron saint of this for a lot of people. And I like those games more than you do, Sean, and I think there are some really great things about the first 3 and the stealth mechanics and stuff. But that's a great example of, if you have to pull out a gun in Metal Gear, fuck it, or like...
Yeah, it's like you might as well turn the fucking game off because you realize how bad it is. It's like, oh god, like now I have to fucking like do this weird go into first person and I can't move, and it's like the camera perspective changes so dramatically I have no idea where anything is, and the aiming is so stiff and it fucking sucks.
And I, like Metal Gear Solid 2 and, 1, 2, 3 in particular, I really, really do love those games. 3 the most of them, because I think 3 gets the balance the best and everything. But you do have to play them through a certain filter of like, you really do have to put yourself in a different time period, shoes at a certain point to like fully enjoy them. You don't with The Last of Us. It really has aged that well, and I think what you said, Thomas, is right on the bat of like, there is that balance between the action and the stealth and it all working that is honestly just surprising. And it's as surprising in 2018 as it is in 2013 because that's just not really a thing you see much. Like, Hitman is actually another good example of this.
Yeah.
And this is not necessarily a criticism of Hitman, just an observation. Hitman can be fun to play guns blazing, you know?
Oh, yeah. Especially
absolutely.
Load into that fucking Colorado map and kill everybody. It's a lot of fun.
Sean, I did that off of Kaido the other day.
It's good.
It's
a fun way to play that fucking game. And then by the end of it, you're like, what have I done? Oh, yes. God. And then it's like you have to like go sit with yourself in a quiet room for a little bit.
I tried it in Morocco, and I didn't get that far because you feel really gross on that one.
Yeah.
Anyway.
There's a lot of innocent people in Marrakesh.
Anyway. Did I say Morocco? Marrakesh, yeah. Anyway, but Hitman, like, there is this feeling of, like, the stealth mechanics are the main thing there that they put, 90% of their time and energy into. And the gunplay is fun and it's competent, but obviously that's not the primary way the game is supposed to be engaged with. The Last of Us doesn't have, I think, that top-level, like, choice on it. It's not supposed to be played as, like, an active, Gears of War-style third-person shooter, but it is also not, like, so far in the other direction where, like, stealth is everything. It really does thread the needle on both of those in a way that is, I think, fairly unique.
Yeah, and it's something that, like, the movements between action and stealth are so seamless in The Last of Us. And that's something that's true about a lot of it. Like, when you mentioned Metal Gear Solid 3, it made me think about, like, one of the enduring memories I have of playing Metal Gear Solid 3 is in fucking menus, because you spend so much of that game going into pause menus and changing your camouflage and doing your eating food and putting your fucking, like, bandaging your wounds and all that shit, which are all interesting mechanics in, like, concept and make sense for, like, the, Cold War survival story it's going for. But it's such an insanely clunky implementation. Obviously, that's an old game. The game came out also like 2005, I think. But one of the great things about The Last of Us is it has a lot of those similar concepts. Obviously, it doesn't have camouflage, but it has all this inventory management as a like core thing about the game, like we were talking about with the backpack and crafting. But all that stuff is so seamless. You don't pause the game and go into a fucking menu and like scroll through 100 things and do like it's. They pared down what you can craft to a like really solid finite list of I think 6 things. You have all your 4 directions on the D-pad, and you can have a couple of things like 2 on the left, 2 on the right, 3 on the top, 3 on the bottom. And so it's like a very compact set of things you have. All of them have a clear purpose, and you can quickly move from equipping weapons to equipping med packs to using med packs to using a bomb or Molotov cocktail to like crafting a new weapon to going in and switching a weapon thing out. Like all that stuff happens so seamlessly without like these really harsh barriers, and the game is going on throughout all of it so that if you're trying to do that in the middle of a combat encounter, it's a fucking thing, and it doesn't let you do the Metal Gear Solid 3 thing or like the game I always think of for this is like Oblivion or Skyrim they made fun of it on Bethesda's E3 thing of I'm going to pause the game and eat a million cheese wedges in the middle of fighting a necromancer, right? And all my health comes back. In The Last of Us, there is no abstraction in that way. It all just flows in. All those states flow into one another.
Yes. And as you're saying, like, this isn't that how every game should do it, but if this is your goal, this is probably the best implementation of all that stuff ever.
Yeah, something about The Last of Us is that, to me, every single facet of it is executed at like a masterclass level. Like, from game design, from like a game design in all the levels of, like, the way the melee combat works with the like gun combat and just the gun combat on its own, and the crafting system and how all those pieces interact with each other in like the sandbox they've made is so tight. Then obviously the graphical design is incredible, the audio design is incredible, the music is incredible, the fucking cutscenes are incredibly well made, the motion capture still holds up incredibly well, which is amazing because that's the kind of stuff you think would age really badly. And then the storytelling is masterful. Like every single element of the game, there's so much care and attention and love and talent put into it, and there's such a great sense of vision and confidence from the top that informs how all those things interact with each other, which is something that very, very few games do.
Oh, absolutely. And this is another way I think The Last of Us presaged the generation to come. It didn't put a cap on the generation that just happened. is that level of polish.
Yeah.
Which is, an early narrative in this current console generation was like the 2014 month of the flops where you had Assassin's Creed Unity and the Master Chief Collection and a bunch of games that came out broken, and there was the conversation about are we over-relying on patches and all that, and a lot of doom and gloom. But I think now, as the generation is not hopefully anywhere near over, but is very mature at this point, to me one of the stories is, at least in terms of exclusives, the amount of polish on games has, I think, taken a clear step up from the previous generation. Like a huge step up in terms of like what you're talking about of all the elements being good, not just some, not just like, a bunch of things about this game are great, but like this thing is crap, but we just ignore that because that's how this is.
It typically before was like, and the story is terrible. Like, the combat's really good, and it's got these great RPG mechanics, but oh boy, like, and that's like one of the things that playing Rise of the Tomb Raider we talked a lot about a couple of weeks ago on the main pod or on the podcast was how that game feels weirdly dated now. Like, even though that game only came out in 2015, it feels more dated to me than The Last of Us, is that it is like that. Like, a lot of stuff in that game is really good, and the story fucking sucks and feels like a story from a game from, like, 2008.
Yeah.
Or Far Cry 5 is exactly like that also. It's like, where it, like, quite literally feels like a story from 2008.
Yes.
Based off the interviews I've read.
Yeah. So, but, like, I think, like, The Last of Us goes right up there on the shelf with something like The Witcher 3, or Persona 5, or Nier Automata, or The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, or Mario Odyssey,
God of War,
where it's like every element of this is polished out the ass. Like there are some, like maybe on day one you're going to have some glitches, like The Witcher 3 or Legend of Zelda or something. But the broader term thing of like how did they think about, conceive of, put together this game is not just polished, but like it has a clear central like game design ideology to it that feels, I think that kind of thing has gotten stronger than it's been since, maybe the Super NES days or something in terms of like these general, major releases, AAA games. And certainly The Last of Us, I feel like, is the prime model for what Sony's been doing on the PS4 generation.
Oh, yeah. Like that was one of the striking things about playing it was, like, this time through was in such close proximity to God of War, specifically, where you see, like, because I knew, obviously, that God of War was heavily inspired by it, but, like, when you play them and, like, next to each other, it's like, oh, yeah, like, this is a lot of what they did with like AI and like character development and a lot of that seamlessness. Obviously, there are harsh cuts in The Last of Us, but there are long stretches that feel like very like seamless for the character, like experience for the character, and that is so much a part of the driving vision of God of War. You can see that in the influence very clearly. Or again, going back to Rise of the Tomb Raider, what I said on the podcast when I talked about that game was that is a game that they made Tomb Raider 1 in 2013, the year that The Last of Us came out, and then they played The Last of Us, and then they made the sequel because everything new in Rise of the Tomb Raider came from The Last of Us. Like, all of it, all the crafting, all the other, items you get, like, the more sort of specific, like, bow stuff and, like, the more stealth focus in the combat that wasn't quite there in Tomb Raider 1. All that shit feels like it's ripped directly from The Last of Us.
I think you could definitely make the argument that coming into this generation, The Last of Us was the most influential game.
Yeah.
Certainly for Sony. Like, all of Sony's first-party games, either there's direct stuff in the game that feels like is taken from things that were directly in The Last of Us, as with God of War, or just, I think, on a broader scale, like the company ethos of, like, we're going to trust these companies with a lot of time, with a lot of money, and with a trust in, like, new, big, bold, adult ideas. And there's been a lot of that. And a lot more going into the future with things like Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Thomas, do you want to give your, 2-minute defense of Tomb Raider? Because I know you've been really mad that we've been beating up on it.
I'm not mad. I just disagree. I actually think it's a really good game. The reason I played it recently is because this has nothing to do with Last of Us, obviously, but I played the first 3 Uncharted games. And, everyone says that Tomb Raider is very much inspired by them, and it is.
It's Diet Uncharted.
Well, it's weird.
Diet Uncharted, but it's way better than the first 3 Uncharted games.
Fuck no, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, well,
the gameplay is.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
Well, because the weird thing is that Uncharted was influenced by Tomb Raider, the old Tomb Raider games, and then the new Tomb Raider games are influenced by Uncharted. I am definitely in the opinion that maybe Uncharted 1 is like a kind of a rough game, and you can see
Uncharted 1 is never mind.
He didn't like Uncharted.
Okay,
it's a bad game.
I think you should play them again because you sound like me when I played them through the first time,
It's
and then
eerie.
I played them again when the Nathan Drake collection came out, and I fucking love those games now. And like Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3 are, I mean, they're different. They're going for different things in terms of structure because they're obviously Uncharted games are like very linear, and the Tomb Raider thing is sort of like wide. You know, they're like narrow open world, wide linear, however, like wanted to just find that weird sort of structure.
Like a Mario or Zelda game.
Yeah, kind of like that. But one of the things that did frustrate me, and we're getting so off track.
It's okay.
But I just want to say this now while I'm thinking
this.
about it. Because I wanted to say it when I was talking about Rise of the Tomb Raider before, and I forgot about it, was Rise of the Tomb Raider, and this is probably true of the first one also, but it's been long enough since I played that I don't quite remember how that worked. But Rise of the Tomb Raider has this weird problem where it wants to do some of the Uncharted set-piece action kind of stuff with, like, everything's crumbling and you're jumping around, but it also wants to be this sort of pseudo-open world. You can always go back and get collectibles, which means that you can't have anything collapse in such a way that you can't get back there. And there's such a weird conflict in terms of, like, as soon as I noticed that, it utterly broke the game in a certain way for me of, like, anytime there is a big spectacle sequence, it's like none of this can have the world cannot be like significantly impacted by what's happening. It's literally impossible by like the game design they've chosen for. You can't do that, and yet they're trying to pretend like they can do that. And it's something I like about what Naughty Dog does with all their games. It's true of Uncharted and true of The Last of Us is it feels like the world you're in and the characters you're playing as and like everything is very much impacted by both your actions and just by things happening in the world. And it's one of the things I love about The Last of Us is it has that dramatic passage of time throughout the story, and it makes use of the seasons in a way that video games almost never do. You know, it's something that like Animal Crossing does, obviously, for like a very direct gameplay thing.
Yeah.
It's like quite literally does it. But generally speaking, you know, like it's always just vaguely like whatever it is. It's like if it's a like Lost Planet or some like snowy game, there's a bunch of snow and it's cold and it's winter, and that's what it is for like the whole game. Or it's like it's the nice sort of summer whatever, or it's spring or whatever it is. And The Last of Us doing that, like this is a year, and where you are and what you're seeing and what the environment is and what the tone is changes dramatically over the course of the story with those seasons. And there's a lot of sense of impact and meaningful change that I think when you have the current trend of open world that we have right now, that is a very, very hard, if not almost occasionally impossible thing to accomplish, is giving a sense of meaningful change in the world.
Yes. And let me offer sorry, Thomas. My other thing with Uncharted versus Tomb Raider, and I'm going to say is not to try to beat up on Tomb Raider, but I think it is a legitimately interesting comparison.
Yeah.
And maybe this will bring us back to The Last of Us. What I value about Naughty Dog, this game design, is the purposefulness with which they attack things. And again, take Uncharted 1 out of this equation if you want. That's fine. Uncharted 1 is a really much rougher game than their later output because they were starting from scratch on that one.
Yeah, it was not literally a PS3 launch game, but it was practically. Right?
Was
like the
within,
PS3
like, 6
was,
months.
as a hardware platform, was under development while they were making Uncharted 1.
Yeah. So, but Uncharted 2, which is definitely like the revolutionary one in game history, through The Last of Us, this included, is like, I think there's a purposefulness with which, like, when they give you a combat encounter, how that combat encounter is laid out, what you are going to do after it to break up the pace, what kind of, like, almost as I said, like, meta puzzle mechanics they're going to put in where they have placed people, how big the arena is, those sorts of things. Last of Us does this much more precisely than Uncharted does, but I think it's there in Uncharted 2 and 3, and especially in 4 and 5. 4 and The Lost Legacy, I call it 5 for sake of argument.
And it's much easier to say.
Yes, it does that really, really well because it's got The Last of Us, in its rearview window, right? But I think there's this purposefulness to it. And not just in, like, the game design, or, like, the combat design, but in the characters and the narrative and how it progresses, and exactly what you're saying, Sean, where like things change and evolve over time, including the characters, how you feel like characters are impacted by the things they're doing in the world, how they like break up pace with like puzzles and climbing sequences and platforming that sometimes are interactive cutscenes, sometimes are much more like player motivated, I'm going to figure out how to climb this thing or get around this obstacle or solve this puzzle, but in any case always try to put you more into this world and into the mind of the character. And I don't think you have to like all of how those mechanics are laid out. Some of this is just going to be a taste thing of like, do you like the shooting mechanics in an Uncharted or something? Because like, especially 1, 2, 3, those are an arcadey style gunplay that we just don't get anymore.
Yeah.
Right? which is kind of like heavily changed in Uncharted 4, right?
And they did, I think, a bad job of like trying to explain to the player, like, do not play this like a Gears of War game. You should, like, when you're playing Uncharted, you shouldn't even be aiming half the time. You should just be fucking firing like a madman, and swinging on shit and jumping around and punching people in the face. That's how you play the combat in those games. I mean, the game doesn't really explain that to you.
Yeah, but I do think there's a purposefulness to that, of like making you feel like that swashbuckling, adventure hero sort of thing they're going for. And I think in The Last of Us, that purposefulness gets, cranked up to 11 in all sorts of ways. And I think what I was struck by when I went back to play Tomb Raider recently this summer was I think Tomb Raider is a game made with a tremendous amount of skill.
Yeah.
Obviously. But I think it's a tremendous amount of skill put at throwing things at a wall and seeing what's going to stick. And, whether that's like, we're going to have a bunch of combat, and the combat is going to kind of come in like fits and starts, and I don't know if like the arenas are like super clear to me. The difficulty levels don't seem to change things, because I played it on the hardest difficulty I had, and it didn't become that much harder to me. And like, it kind of would go through like a bunch of combat like without any significant breaks, or like you're just a lot of like running down the hall and shooting people, and then something would happen, but then like a lot of the puzzles are optional. And I think this is most obvious to me in like Lara Croft's characterization. And this is something we've talked about a little bit before, but this is something that struck me, is that the first thing that happens to Lara Croft in Tomb Raider, like in a playable moment, is she's hanging upside down. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you have to like move back and forth, and she falls onto a piece of rebar. And
or is it like a human rib? I don't remember. She falls on human ribs or something too. Okay.
It's a little...
It's not rebar, it's a metal rod.
Okay, well...
It's not serrated, which...
Apparently 2013 was the year of falling onto metal rods for your video game protagonists.
Yes. This is what I'm saying. So she falls onto that, pulls it out, is hurt for a couple of minutes, but then is like pretty much immediately back on her feet and fine.
Yeah, it does like the video game thing of like, I have the slow walking animation for like a minute, and then it's like, regenerated health picked in, I hit the story
cutscene. All this filthy water has infected the wound.
Yeah. And that would be fine if the game did not also want you to simultaneously take this Lara as much more realistic and like taking the punches, and death affects her and these things.
Yeah, I think doing like the whole Survivor Island thing.
Yes, which it's paying lip service to more than I think it's truly engaging with, because it's the same thing of like, it also like wants you to think about like, oh god, she's killing someone, but then we're going to do the Uncharted thing where she kills 1,000 people, and those two things are not compatible to me. And then I played The Last of Us again, and I remembered like, not only does Joel get impaled by a metal rod, but that is the next like 5 hours of the game.
And serrated metal rod.
Well, that's not the
you change your player character, like
months pass.
Yeah.
And like he never gets fully healed in the winter section. He's never at 100%.
Yeah.
And so literally they then do a major time jump to get to the point where you could believe that he's up and on his feet. And in fact, not only that, there's an entire DLC campaign about Ellie going through hell to get a little first aid kit so she can stitch him up. And that's all I mean, is there is a commitment to the purposefulness in Naughty Dog that I think is fairly unique in the video game space. It has obviously been very influential this generation, and which I truly respond to. And if a game like Tomb Raider feels a little outdated to me, it's that lack of specific purposefulness. Again, it's made with a ton of skill. It is obviously fun to play in a bunch of ways. That's all I'm saying. Thomas, rebut if you want.
I just have... Look, Uncharted 1, I don't like.
Yeah.
The only reason I played through the whole thing is because I like The Last of Us so much. Uncharted 2 and 3, I like a lot.
Yeah.
Especially 3. Some people like 3 less than 1. Those people are crazy. I don't understand.
We're all in good company here of people who like Uncharted 3.
Okay, good.
There are
people.
It's the same thing. I think it's the same thing with Mass Effect 3. It's just like, it was different and I didn't like it. But
it was both that, and it was the thing of like Uncharted 2 changed so much about Uncharted 1, and Uncharted 3 changes less about Uncharted 2. So people at the time were like, this sucks because it's not as different. And then when you play it outside that context, you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is clearly like the best one of these 3.
The other thing about 3 that I liked more than 2 is the puzzles actually felt interesting to me in 3.
They've always gotten better with that.
There were puzzles, but I thought they're not super interesting. In 1, there are kind of puzzles, but it kind of just tells you the answer every time, and then you just do it and you keep going. I don't know. I won't talk anymore about
each Uncharted game gets better about the puzzle aspect.
And I understand. I think...
What's your favorite thing about Tomb Raider?
The gameplay.
Like, what about the gameplay?
I like the bow mechanics. I like the gunplay, even though I usually use the bow, and I like the climbing a lot. And I like all the puzzles. I like they're small and narrow in focus in Tomb Raider 1. In Rise of the Tomb Raider, they're a little more broad, and I like that too.
A little. It's again like last time I played Tomb Raider 1 was like 2014, so it's been a while.
Tomb Raider feels a little bit to me like it's afraid to make the puzzles central because they feel like it's not something the gaming public wants, even though I think there's a lot of data to the contrary.
I think in Shadow of the Tomb Raider they're trying to address that because they're saying they're going to have way more tombs to explore, which like if you're the Tomb Raider, maybe that should be something to think about. But
at a certain point also, this is what I mean by purposefulness, just stop making that shit optional. That should be a part of the game.
I recognize that there's a lot of rough things about Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider. I recognize that the story's not great, a lot of the voice acting is kind of subpar, the overall pacing isn't all that great. I didn't think the pacing in Uncharted 2 was very good either. I'm probably in the minority on that. And maybe it's because I'm playing it for the first time 10 years after it came out.
No, that's totally fair.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not trying to beat up on you on this.
There are a lot of people that like the new Tomb Raider games more than Uncharted. You are not alone in that feeling.
I think primarily the reason I like it more is because I played Tomb Raider first, and therefore I have a greater affinity for it.
That's
probably the biggest reason. I recognize a lot of things, especially, again, about Uncharted 2 and even more so 3, are really, really good. I really like the way characters are developed in Uncharted 3. The Chibi Nathan stuff is kind of annoying sometimes. Sorry, I've been using Chibi a lot recently. When you're Kid Nathan, some of it is like you're just walking at the slowest pace possible, and it's like, okay, can we pick this up a little bit? But the story in all those sections I really like. And because of all that, I am really looking forward to playing Uncharted 4 now.
Yes.
I played like half an hour of it last night. Because that's the Uncharted game that was made after Last of Us.
Yeah, by Druckmann and Straley, who are the leads on The Last of Us.
So I'm really looking forward.
Interestingly, this was confirmed at E3. The director on The Lost Legacy is the co-director on Last of Us 2 with Druckmann.
Yeah.
Actually, Druckmann isn't even the director. He's the creative director. The game director is one of the guys who did Lost Legacy, and I think a woman, and I don't remember her name.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, that is how it was of like Druckmann was always the like narrative or creative director, and Straley was the game director. So him leading.
It's just cool because The Lost Legacy is very fucking good, and as an audition to do The Last of Us 2, they fucking nailed it.
Yeah.
Also, like I said, the voice acting in Uncharted is really good. At like every single character is really good.
I mean, that was like the most revolutionary thing about Uncharted 1 at the time was like, oh god, voice acting and performance capture can be good.
Yeah, compared to like other than maybe Mass Effect, any other game in 2007.
Yeah.
Well, Mass Effect 7 is more hit and miss. I think there are some characters that aren't great.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Tomb Raider. I actually think Lara and a few of the side characters are voiced really, really well.
Lara's
other than that, they're prether bad, actually.
Yeah.
Other than that, they are very like video game voice actor performances,
they're
right?
mid-2000 video game voice actor performances. The other thing about Uncharted that just I didn't like all that much, especially in the first one and a little bit in the second one, I just didn't like Nathan very much.
He's an asshole. Yeah.
I just don't like him in the first one. And then the second one, maybe it's because I played them over the course of 4 days. I played those 3 games.
Wow,
They're pretty short, actually.
They are. No, last time I played Uncharted 2, I think I clocked it at 5 hours. So it's like you can when you play through them, especially once already.
Uncharted 3, I think took me like 6 hours.
Yeah,
so
you can blaze through those fucking things.
I think if I had put more time in between 1 and 2, I actually probably would have liked 2 more.
Yeah,
I did like 2 a lot, but
all right, let's get back on track. But like The Last of Us, as I said, it's to me it is the purposefulness and the intention with which everything is done. And again, if we're drawing lessons from 5 years later, what has lingered from The Last of Us, I think that is maybe its biggest legacy. Is bequeathing onto video gaming, not solely, but definitely I think making it more of a thing just in the general atmosphere of that idea of, everything in a game should have a real clear purpose for being there. And again, Last of Us is not the only one. I think like Mass Effect 2 is a huge progenitor of this, of like, let's cut the fat and what is there is going to really truly matter. I think like a game like The Witcher 3 took this to another level. I think Breath of the Wild and Nier Automata has like some junk mechanics for a very specific purpose in that game.
Nier Automata is a flawed masterpiece that its flaws is why it is it's the perfect video game.
That is your thesis, and I think you are correct about that. Even if I don't love it with the same intensity, that's okay. It's the right way to say it. Thomas loves Nier Automata.
Yeah, probably about as much as you do.
Yeah, good. You're on the right side of history with that one.
All right. Anyway, but yeah, let's also talk about. Did you play Left Behind, Sean?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I did not replay Left Behind when I did my first replay.
I didn't either.
Because it was only like 5 months or something. Like, it was such a short interval. So
they both come out in 2014.
Yeah. So this was the first time I've replayed through Left Behind. It's really fucking good.
Left Behind. I don't know if I would make this argument. If you wanted to tell me Left Behind is the best thing about The Last of Us, I would not bat an eyelash at that. It is as well written 2 hours of game as has ever existed.
Yes.
Yeah. I would buy that, assuming you've played The Last of Us. I mean, obviously in 2 hours it doesn't have as much chance to actually develop characters as The Last of Us does, but for that short amount of time, absolutely.
I think you could argue, and I think there are a lot of people for whom this is true. I've seen the think pieces that I think the Ellie Riley stuff hit them harder than anything in the main game. And I can completely understand that, especially like I did see this from a lot of female critics, women, gay women too, gay men also. Of that game, dives into or portrays sexuality in a much starker way than The Last of Us does, certainly, but a lot of video games, period, especially in 2014, were. I think Left Behind is a little masterpiece in and of itself.
Absolutely, it's one of the things that was interesting about playing Left Behind was. It is, because I was thinking about, we had the podcast conversation where you're talking about Last of Us having a novelistic sort of structure, and then Left Behind is maybe the best cinematic storytelling structure in a video game I've ever played, because it's so contained, because it is the length of a movie, and it has the sort of like intercutting thing that is very common with movies, and it gives it that sort of structure of like, it's a very focused, contained story. It is, one thing I find so impressive about it is how smooth the like exposition is, because almost nothing about Riley and Ellie's relationship other than the little speech that Ellie gives at the end of the Last of Us campaign, and then also if you like a little bit of hints when you look into her backpack and see the Firefly medal with Riley's name on it. Like there's a little bits of information about it, but basically everything about that relationship has to be introduced and developed in this like 2 to 3 hour space, and then the way they sort of like exposit to you very subtly how they're like friendship started, and then how like they've had this rocky patch and have gotten back together without ever having to show you any of that directly is really impressive to me.
Yeah, I think the dialogue between Ellie and Riley in Left Behind is maybe the best writing in a Naughty Dog game. Especially the stuff in the mall and just how it so effortlessly swings back and forth between this very casual 2 teenage kids hanging out, having fun in a mall, and how utterly relatable that feels with the larger existential threats that they are facing in this world, with the very serious, discussion of like Riley leaving, Ellie not wanting to be left behind, the, love, the genuine like, is it friendship, is it more how you find out it's kind of more near the end of the game and what decisions the characters make, the speech Riley has at the end to her. I think just in terms of like just naturalistic human dialogue, there is some stuff in there that still blows me the hell away.
And then just in terms of like the bigger picture storytelling, the way all that is contrasted with Ellie in the modern day trying to save Joel, and the way that like the finales are kind of intercut together of, in the past, Ellie losing her best friend, and in the present, her saving like the only person she has left to her. Like, obviously, it only works if you need to play The Last of Us. Like, you can't play Left Behind without The Last of Us. Like, I think you need that Ellie Joel relationship established enough to do that. But if you have that information about the character relationships and that experience, it says so much through that without having to like say anything directly about it.
Yeah.
Like I love that Ellie is never like directly, like explicitly ever reminiscing about her time with Riley in the present day section of Left Behind. Like,
they don't do the thing where like Ellie like leans against a wall holding her gun and be like, I miss Riley, and like looking up and to the right, and the image shimmers and then goes back to her waking up.
That would be like this super goofy way of doing it, but you could also do a more subtle version of like she looks at a sign that reminds her of, and like in match cuts with a sign in a mall in the past, because they are both set in malls, but they never do that. Like you can if you want to read into that Ellie's maybe thinking about that in the background because she's in the mall again, but it feels more that it's like that's for the benefit of the audience. That's like if it's something it's something that is informing Ellie, but only because this experience has so scarred her. It's not something she's specifically thinking about. And I think there's something really strong about the confidence in that storytelling that you do not need to make really explicit connections between those things. All the connections are purely thematic and visual.
I did do the thing this time that I wondered about way back when we reviewed Left Behind on the PS3 in like episode 70-something, where I said, wouldn't it be weird if like in this remaster they added a mode where they inserted Left Behind between fall and winter? And I did that manually. I backed out when winter started. I played Left Behind, and then I went back in.
I thought about it this time, and I'm like, that is so not the way the story's supposed to be told.
It's not supposed to be.
It would just so break that cut to winter, you know?
It doesn't so much matter because I know the story.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, part of the cut to winter is you are left for, like, 2 hours of gameplay not knowing Joel is alive.
Yeah.
Like, that's a significant thing. That, well, I guess you know because she's trying to get medicine, but it's like...
But like, that whole section where you're hunting the deer, you have no idea.
Yeah.
Which, the first time I played the game, I remember that it took me forever to fucking get that deer because I hadn't used the bow that much at that point.
Yes. It took me forever this time, too, because that is one place where the listen mode was really useful.
That is true, yeah. It can be kind of hard to find that deer.
Yeah. But anyway, it is interesting to play it that way. The mall stuff, it is kind of interesting to see, like, just the chronological next step. There is, on a gameplay level, a weird thing where the left behind ratchets up the difficulty. So, like, there's a clear, like, we go up in difficulty, and then we're going to come back down for winter a little bit, because winter is not overall as hard as Left Behind. But, yeah, it is not the way the game should be played. I'm glad I did the weird experiment.
Yeah.
I don't agree, actually, that Left Behind is harder. I can see why it could be, although you said you played it on the highest difficulty.
Well, I played on Survivor.
Oh, okay, but you played all of it on Survivor, not just Left Behind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically.
Well, I mean, for me, one of the things that was really cool about Left Behind, at least the combat parts, but wasn't difficult, was that you could actually have the humans and the infected attack each other.
That's fun.
And but just the strategy around that, too, it only happens in maybe 2 or 3 actual encounters.
Yeah.
But just trying to work that out and thinking, like, well, I have 1 bullet.
I do have this brick, and there are a lot of clickers over here, so there is something so, like, it's perfect, but feels so weirdly cruel of being like, you know what, I'm not even going to kill these guys myself, like, I'm just going to throw this bottle over there and let you fuckers fight it out. And knowing how horrifying the infected are, it's just like, do you guys deal with it? Like, fuck it, man.
Yeah, no, I did it. The part in Left Behind that is scarred into my memory from a Survivor run is there's a part where you get out of that area on that's got the water and the trucks, and you go to the next part, and it is in a pet shop. And there are 3 clickers and 3 or 4 runners, and at the end of it, you're going to have to lift this big gate to get out, and that gate makes noise, and so you do have to kill everything if you're going to do it. And in Survivor difficulty, you have to be really careful because the clickers will hear you even more than they will on hard or something. Like you have to be, and this is a really super compact space, and like right when you start, there's a clicker kind of coming your way, and you are in water, and you have to make it. And there's a runner right next to you who's like not running; he's like just standing there for now, and you have to make some decisions about how you're going to engage with all this. And that is another one where I had to Dark Souls it, of just like, I'm going to know every inch of this fucking thing and have a perfect strategy for it, because you also have like nothing as Ellie at that point. I had no ammo. I had a brick and a knife, and that's it. And up to that point, there has not been a combat encounter. And if you played it the way I did, where you put it in at winter, there has not been a combat encounter that asks you to take on 3 fucking clickers with nothing other than like, a shiv and a brick, right?
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to get through, and I'm glad I played it that way, but that's why it is that hard, I think.
Yeah, I think actually the Survivor difficulty makes Left Behind a lot harder than I think it would be otherwise, because it's so resource scarce.
Yes.
Because you have no opportunity to build up resources, obviously, for like Left Behind, because you just sort of like have what you have at the start of that, which is basically nothing. I found Left Behind particularly difficult on Survivor in a way that I did not remember playing it. I remember playing it on hard and just like breezing through it.
Yeah,
on Survivor,
it's not a
pretty difficult
encounter.
Yeah,
it's just if you're sneaky, it's not bad at all. Actually.
For me, in Left Behind, it was more the last fight when you're trying to really at the very end, where there's all the guys at the door and more guys come in. On Survivor, and it was partially because I should have just restarted the encounter at some point, because I had just made a bunch of bad like shots that missed, and had like no ammo, and I was like, I'm going to fight this out, and it's like and then it auto-saved at some point halfway through, and I had nothing. It was like, I should have restarted, or you still can restart because it'll take you back before those like mid-fight autosaves. But yeah, Left Behind's really good. It's fun. You should not play it in the middle of winter. That's a weird way to play that game.
It was a fun experiment.
You also have to be like so on top of your shit of just like I have to imagine like right in the middle of that cut to black, you just hammer out to like the front. It's like shut the game down or something and load it back up.
I basically skipped the cutscene, backed out, and then went back in when I was done and rewatched the cutscene and everything. Yeah, it's not the way the game is meant to be played. I'm not saying that. It was just I suggested it publicly on the podcast, so I felt somewhat obliged to try my stupid experiment.
It would be like playing halfway through Halo 2 and then loading up Halo 3 ODST and playing through that and then finishing Halo 2. Basically, is what you did.
Yes. I mean,
maybe
a little less,
because
ODST is a different game. But yeah,
right, yeah.
Anyway, all right,
you can play both of them on Master Chief Collection.
You can,
so it's all one game.
It's all one game.
There you go.
Well, they should add that. Just like they have the playlist function, they should do that with like you can mix Halo 2 and Halo 3 ODST and make it. Someone's probably made that playlist. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Final thoughts on The Last of Us. Anyone have anything you want to say?
I mean, one other thing I want to say that like I've just sort of noticed about this conversation that I thought was cool was that most of the stuff we talked about was game design stuff, which I feel like is something that with Last of Us is overlooked a lot, and maybe it's partially because we're going back to it. In some ways, that's the stuff that stands out the most. Obviously, also because we already have like 3 hours or whatever the fuck it is recorded of us talking probably mostly about the story, which is what I remember a lot about our first conversation about The Last of Us on the podcast. And it's cool that The Last of Us holds up so much as a gameplay experience that we can have like a 2-hour conversation just about that, you know, mostly.
Yeah. Troy Baker, Ashley Johnson, two of the best performances in a video game ever.
Nolan North is
David. That's what I was going to say.
Did you know?
I didn't know until he told me afterward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we didn't know until the credits when we played it. That is a savagely good performance he gives. That is some of Nolan North's best work.
Yeah, he's a good villain in that game.
Yes.
I mean, he's a villain by the end. He's not a villain at first. But.
Oh, it's just something where you're so used to Nolan North sounding like Nolan North, particularly in the Uncharted games, like Nathan Drake. That's like his voice.
I mean, Nathan Drake sounds like the voice he does for the robot in Destiny.
Right? Yeah, it's like it's like that's generally the mode he's in. He's got a great like everyman kind of quality to his voice. You know, he's really good as that. But it like makes you appreciate like, oh right, no, he's like a remarkably talented voice actor. If he's able to pull in that performance, he's Nolan North, the dude who's in every video, particularly the year 2013. We're like still at peak Nolan North at that point, you know, right? Like that's when like Troy Baker's star was rising and Nolan North was at the absolute like peak of voice acting in video games. And he's able to pull in a performance so good for a fucking Naughty Dog game where you should be looking for Nolan North at a fucking Naughty Dog game. That for both you and me, Jonathan, it was not until the credits that we saw Nolan North play David and was like, David, who's... Wait, what? That dude was fucking Nolan North? Holy shit.
I just imagine like, you know, they got him on the set to do the voice and he started doing it, and people just like shit their pants, like in fear and maybe also just elation of like, oh my god, this is so much better than I mean, obviously Naughty Dog must like worship at the altar of Nolan North, given how much
he made them what they are.
He kind of did, but even they must have been surprised at how good he is in this. Yeah. But yeah, I love all the voice acting is so fucking good in this. Gustavo Santaolalla, who does the music. The let's get a movie guy to do a score for a video game thing does not always work.
No.
This might be one of the best examples of it.
And it's actually been working more since The Last of Us.
Yeah. It's an amazing piece of video game music. And I think not just like the major themes, but a lot of the like combat scenario stuff, the more atmospheric things.
I mean, you talk about world building. The music in that game is really subtle. It's not like Skyrim. The music is a huge part of the world building, but it's very much in your face.
Yeah, there's no part in The Last of Us where you like come out of the building and there's like brah 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 comes in, right?
Yeah, it's never even like Jonathan was saying. It's never like you're in the middle of combat and there's like bup, bup, bup. It's kind of there and you don't notice it, and that's why it's great.
Yeah,
the music feels lean and mean. And, like, it is stemming not from, like, the things in the world, but from the emotions of the world. Of like, yes, a sad banjo is what The Last of Us looks like.
Well,
yes,
banjo.
like a mean little atmospheric beat while you are beating guys to death feels like that is what Joel is feeling in his heart.
Yeah.
As a music person, this might not actually be interesting, but a banjo is historically an instrument made out of garbage.
Yeah.
So in the world of Last of Us, it definitely enhances that a lot for a music-minded person like me.
And I hope the first scene of The Last of Us 2 is just Gustavo comes out onto I don't know, just a stage. He sits down in the hoodie for 10 minutes and just plays the banjo. And that is it's an overture, right? Mm-hmm. But it's just him on a banjo sitting there, on a stage in a church. And then leaves, and then you play the game.
I would love that so much. If it's just, I could just see it like that black screen, and then you just hear this boom, and then the spotlight comes on. You can hear the electricity of the spotlight in the background. He slowly walks on stage, sits down on the stool, pulls out the banjo. He has the hoodie on and just starts going. Yeah,
they should do that. Or I don't know, have an intermission in the game where it's moving through the environment and you stop on a guy next to a trash can on fire for warmth in the middle of winter, and he pulls out a banjo and just starts playing.
And then you shoot him in the face.
That's how the scene ends.
Because you can't fucking trust him.
No, you don't shoot him in the face. You beat the shit out of him. Because that's one of the things I love about, going back to the main game, such a smart little thing is that at the very beginning section, when you're, not the prologue section, but when you're walking through with Tess to go kill Robert and all that stuff at the beginning of the game, you go through the abandoned houses where the spores are, and there's that one dude who has been trapped under all this equipment, and he basically is going to die because he's in the sport area, and you have this sort of implied choice of you can shoot him because you have nothing else to kill him with. So you either shoot him with the gun you just got, or you walk away. I played the game 3 times. Every single time I've just walked away.
I shot him.
No, don't use the bullet.
You get ammo when you shoot him.
Don't use the bullet, man.
You get ammo when you shoot him.
No.
You do get ammo when you shoot him, but
I wonder if you do on Survivor or not.
I don't know.
I didn't go back to do it, but
yeah,
you just but there's something about it's not worth the bullet feel of that fuck it.
I bet if I played it again and I didn't know that it gave you extra ammo, I probably wouldn't though. Because when you're first playing the game, I'm not thinking I'm never going to get ammo. I'm thinking this guy's in pain. I should probably put him out of misery.
I see that it's just you're literally not worth the bullet. Your life and the suffering of your final moments is not worth as much to me as this one revolver bullet.
Well, I think we've gotten to the heart of our discussion on the Last of Us 5-year anniversary edition re-release. It's going to say on the box, "You're not worth the bullet." Sean Chapman, Weekly.
No, I like The Last of Us. You're not worth the bullet edition.
Yes, exactly. As that guy on the cover under the roof, just dying.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it. Thomas, thank you for being here.
Of course.
Yes.
Happy to.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening. Last of Us is a good game. If you've never played it, you should play it.
Yeah, holds up.
Better than Tomb Raider.
It is, yeah.
It definitely is.
Better than Uncharted 2.
It's way better than Tomb Raider.
Better than Uncharted.
So much better than Tomb Raider.
Which is better than Uncharted?
You have to stop this, Thomas.